Hey my dear listener, before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Comment down where are you from and what's your time right now. Let's jump into the video. Story 1: The Arrival. First impressions of the workhouse. You approach the workhouse as the winter fog curls across the cobblestones of the street, dampening the dull glow of gas lamps. Its brick walls rise like a silent sentinel, austere and uninviting, and the iron gates stand closed, signaling the rigid structure within. For those entering, this building is more than a shelter, it is a threshold into a world governed by strict rules, deprivation, and the meticulous oversight of officials whose authority shapes every moment of your existence. In Victorian England, workhouses were institutions designed not only to house the poor but to enforce a particular morality. Poverty, in the eyes of the ruling classes, was often interpreted as a personal failing, a moral lapse that required correction. You, like many others, have arrived not because of crime or scandal, but because of circumstances beyond your control: illness, unemployment, or the death of a breadwinner. Yet here, personal hardship is transformed into regimented routine, stripped of dignity and autonomy. The first encounter is with the gatekeeper, an intermediary figure who measures not only your physical presence but your readiness to comply. Names are recorded, ages verified, and basic health observed. Children are separated from their parents. Families are divided in a matter of minutes. The harsh logic of the poor law dictates that family bonds must not interfere with the workhouse's primary function: containment and labor. You notice the way children cling to their mothers' skirts, only to be pried away gently but firmly, and you understand immediately that survival here depends on submission, endurance, and a peculiar kind of invisibility. Inside, the central hall stretches before you, echoing with the shuffle of feet and murmurs of conversation. The architecture is functional: high ceilings for ventilation, rows of benches along the walls for registration, and doors leading off to dormitories, dining halls, and workrooms. It is a space designed to enforce order through visibility. Every movement is observable, every expression potentially noted by the matron, the master, or the clerks. You sense that the very air is heavy with discipline. The workhouse operates not through threats alone, but through the omnipresence of rules that are at once banal and relentless. Dormitories offer the first glimpse of communal living. Rows of narrow beds, each with a thin mattress and coarse blankets, await the new arrivals. There is little privacy. Sleeping quarters are shared between strangers, and the room carries the faint, persistent odor of bodies pressed close together. The physical discomfort is immediate: the chill of unheated spaces, the stiffness of beds, the rough texture of wool against skin. Yet it is the social discomfort that weighs more heavily. In this room, hierarchy is subtle but pervasive. Experienced inmates, those who have endured years within these walls, navigate the space with a quiet authority. Newcomers are watched, tested, and subtly instructed in the unspoken codes of survival. Meals are equally regimented. The dining hall is stark, with long wooden tables and benches polished by countless elbows and forearms. Food is allocated in precise portions: a bowl of thin porridge, a small hunk of bread, sometimes a modest serving of cabbage or potatoes. Hunger is an omnipresent companion, and one quickly learns that table manners are less about etiquette than about efficiency. Eating too quickly draws attention. Eating too slowly invites judgment. Observation here is constant, and the distribution of sustenance is as much a lesson in obedience as it is in nourishment. Work assignments follow quickly. The nature of labor varies by gender and age. Men may be sent to the workrooms to break stones, repair garments, or haul coal. Women often spin, sew, or perform cleaning tasks, while children sweep floors or assist in kitchens. Labor is relentless, and the pace is dictated by overseers who measure output with meticulous care. It is exhausting work, not necessarily physically dangerous, but designed to enforce discipline and instill the lesson that survival here is earned through compliance and effort. Each day blurs into the next, and the distinction between task and punishment often disappears entirely. Observation of others becomes a survival skill. You note the subtle ways inmates communicate without words, the quiet signals that indicate which supervisors are lenient, which tasks allow slight improvisation, and where small kindnesses may be found. Alliances are temporary and fragile. Trust is difficult to maintain. Conversations are brief, coded, and often circumspect. Here, the ability to read behavior, to predict moods and responses, is as vital as the physical work itself. The workhouse is also a place where time is measured differently. Days are defined by routine rather than sunlight or weather. The ringing of bells signals meals, work shifts, and lights out. Life is organized around these markers, creating a rhythm that is at once monotonous and oppressive. You begin to lose track of days. Weeks merge into months. The monotony is a tool. By controlling time and labor, the authorities limit opportunities for reflection, dissent, or escape. The mind is engaged, not in thought or imagination, but in the precise management of immediate survival. Despite the apparent bleakness, the human spirit persists in small, almost imperceptible ways. Children find ways to entertain themselves in brief intervals, humming quietly or crafting simple toys from scraps. Adults cultivate small routines, memorizing tasks and interactions to reduce mental strain. Some keep personal items hidden, whether a worn handkerchief or a small trinket, symbols of identity in a place intent on erasing individuality. Even in the harshest conditions, you witness acts of quiet resistance, strategies of survival that are subtle but significant. Health is another constant concern. The close quarters, poor nutrition, and relentless labor contribute to frequent illness. Coughs, fevers, and infections spread quickly, and the infirmary, while present, is a minimal sanctuary. Here, the sick are treated with basic remedies, often lacking sufficient care. Death is not uncommon, and yet it is seldom discussed openly. Mourning is private. Grief is circumscribed by the institution's unyielding rules. The presence of mortality is a silent teacher, reinforcing the stakes of survival and the necessity of compliance. Your first day concludes with the realization that the workhouse is more than a building. It is a system, a microcosm of society's approach to poverty and morality. It is governed by regulations designed to maintain order and limit expense, but within its walls, human resilience quietly asserts itself. Observing the routines, noting the subtleties of authority, and learning the small strategies for enduring discomfort become immediate priorities. You sense that adaptation is not optional, it is essential. As night falls, you lie in your narrow bed, listening to the low hum of breathing and the occasional sigh of fatigue. The walls seem to hold the echoes of countless arrivals before you, each navigating the same challenges, each learning the same lessons of endurance. Outside, the world continues, indifferent to your struggles. Inside, the workhouse imposes its own rhythm, one that demands compliance, observation, and quiet fortitude. And yet, even as you settle into the routine, a question lingers. How will these early lessons shape not only your survival, but the person you will become within these walls? Will the strategies you adopt today sustain you tomorrow? Or will the relentless pressure of this environment reveal vulnerabilities you cannot yet foresee? The second morning in the workhouse dawns with the same muted gray light filtering through high, dusty windows. You awaken before the bell, your body stiff from the unfamiliar mattress and the constant chill of the dormitory. The room smells faintly of boiled cabbage, damp wood, and human proximity, a combination that, after a night of uneasy sleep, lingers in the mind as a reminder of the place you now inhabit. You rise and move with practiced care, aware of the eyes that follow small motions. In a space designed to suppress individuality, even gestures carry meaning. Which bunk you choose to occupy, how you fold your thin blankets, the timing of your movements each can signal compliance or resistance, experience or inexperience. Survival here is, at least in part, a matter of observation and adaptation. Breakfast is served in silence, the clatter of spoons and bowls punctuating the otherwise muted chatter. The porridge is watery, with little nutritional value, but the matron watches the dining hall closely, noting who finishes quickly, who hesitates, who dares to ask for more. Children eat in a separate area, their small bodies trembling with hunger and apprehension. For them, the workhouse is a first encounter with structured authority, a place where autonomy is curtailed almost immediately, where play is regimented, and where lessons in obedience are learned before understanding. Work assignments follow swiftly. You are sent to a room where men are breaking stones, laboring at a monotonous, exhausting task. Each strike of the hammer produces a rhythm that echoes through the hall, a sound both hypnotic and oppressive. The task is unskilled yet physically demanding, and yet it is not labor alone that exhausts it is the constant, watchful presence of overseers. Any pause, any slip, any misalignment of motion is noted. Punishment is rarely immediate, often administrative. A note sent to the master, a reduction in rations, or the reassignment of tasks to a more punitive station. The children, meanwhile, are swept through a rigorous schedule of small chores and lessons. The idea, ostensibly, is to educate and prepare them for eventual independence, but the reality is starkly different. The education is minimal, the hours long, and the expectations strict. Mistakes are met with correction, sometimes harsh, sometimes subtle. Yet even here, resilience emerges. Children learn to memorize routines, to anticipate what is expected, to cultivate small relationships that provide comfort amidst relentless authority. As the day progresses, you begin to notice the subtle hierarchy among inmates. Those who have been inside for months or years move with an assuredness that newcomers lack. They know which tasks are easiest, which supervisors are more lenient, and how to negotiate small privileges without attracting censure. The social map of the workhouse is invisible to outsiders, but intensely familiar to those who inhabit it. Survival requires not only physical stamina, but the intelligence to navigate these relationships, to read moods and intentions, and to act with both caution and cunning. The infirmary is a quiet, grim reminder of mortality. Illness spreads quickly in close quarters, exacerbated by poor diet and fatigue. Those who become sick are moved to a sparsely furnished room, attended by a matron or a nurse who has little training beyond basic remedies. Fever, coughs, and gastrointestinal complaints are common. The workhouse is rarely a place of recovery. Deaths occur quietly, often noted in the records with little ceremony. Yet even in sickness, the inhabitants develop routines. Careful observation of what foods can be eaten, packing of labor, and strategies for preserving energy. These are small acts of survival, human responses to conditions designed to erode individuality. Meal times continue to dominate the structure of the day. The noon ration is little more than bread and watery broth. Eating is a lesson in moderation and observation. Too much attention to the food can attract the matron's scrutiny. Too little can leave the body weak. Conversations are brief, cautious, and coded. Stories from the outside world are shared sparingly, as nostalgia for what has been lost is a dangerous indulgence. Humor, when it surfaces, is quiet, private, a fleeting reprieve from the weight of routine. Evenings bring a deceptive calm. The bell signals the end of work, yet the dormitory offers no comfort. In the half-light, you notice small acts of defiance and ingenuity. A child hides a bit of bread to share with a younger sibling. A woman smooths the rough edges of a handmade garment for personal use. A man quietly sketches on scraps of paper. These are tiny rebellions, unnoticed by the authorities but profoundly meaningful to those who engage in them. Survival is more than endurance. It is the preservation of identity, the maintenance of self in a system designed to erase it. Sleep, when it comes, is restless. Your body remembers the cold, the hunger, the labor, and the constant surveillance. Yet the mind continues to wander, imagining alternative worlds, recalling moments of freedom, questioning the inevitability of this environment. In these moments, the workhouse seems simultaneously permanent and provisional, a place of order, but one that is fragile under the strain of human endurance. Over days and weeks, routines solidify. You learn which supervisors are tolerant of small errors, which tasks are less grueling, which corners of the workhouse offer warmth or relative quiet. You discover the rhythms of the dormitory, the dining hall, and the workrooms. Adaptation becomes a subtle art, knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, when to assert needs, and when to comply fully. Each day is an exercise in judgment and observation, a delicate balance between compliance and self-preservation. Yet with adaptation comes a quiet tension. You begin to notice the slow erosion of certain freedoms, the ability to choose one's own schedule, the capacity for uninterrupted thought, the pleasure of leisure or idle observation. The workhouse shapes not only your actions but your perceptions, your expectations, your understanding of what is possible. In this environment, survival is inseparable from transformation, and the lessons learned are as much about self-discipline and caution as they are about physical endurance. By the end of this second section, it becomes clear that the workhouse is not merely a place of physical hardship, it is a crucible of psychological strain. Every action is observed, every routine monitored, every human interaction laden with potential consequences. The mechanisms of authority are subtle and persistent, and the inhabitants must continuously adjust to maintain both their health and their dignity. And yet, despite all this adaptation, a lingering question persists. As the weeks and months unfold, how will prolonged exposure to this regimented, austere environment shape the mind and spirit? Will the strategies of survival harden resilience, or will they quietly erode the very essence of individuality and hope? Months pass, and the rhythm of the workhouse becomes almost second nature. You wake, eat, labor, and sleep with a mechanical precision that might have seemed impossible on your first day. Yet, beneath the routine, tension simmers. Physical exhaustion, hunger, and the ever-present oversight combine to create a subtle but persistent pressure. You realize that while the body can adapt to discomfort, the mind experiences a different test. The challenge of maintaining a sense of self, dignity, and hope in a space designed to strip both away. The work tasks, once purely mechanical, now reveal themselves as instruments of control. Stone breaking, laundry, and sewing are not only laborious, they are psychological trials, reinforcing the hierarchies imposed by overseers and the poor law. You notice how small missteps are magnified, how errors invite scrutiny, and how conformity is rewarded subtly through increased rations, less severe tasks, or verbal approval. Compliance is survival, deviation is risk. In these conditions, your perception of time, value, and effort shifts. Tasks once deemed menial acquire significance, not for their inherent worth, but for the way they maintain your position within the system. Health, too, becomes a daily negotiation. Illnesses flare unpredictably, and each case is a lesson in adaptation. Some individuals develop strategies for coping with fatigue and minor ailments, resting strategically during brief lulls, rationing food to stretch energy, or quietly avoiding the more punishing tasks. Others are less fortunate. The infirmary, minimal as it is, receives those whose bodies can no longer endure, offering limited relief but seldom comfort. Death is quiet, almost bureaucratic, recorded in ledgers rather than mourned publicly. Yet its presence is a persistent reminder of the stakes at play. Every cough, every fever, every moment of weakness carries consequences that can ripple through the dormitory and workrooms. The social dynamics within the workhouse evolve alongside routine. Temporary alliances form, friendships emerge, and small acts of solidarity provide moments of relief. You notice a woman who quietly shares a piece of bread with a child, a man who offers guidance on completing a task more efficiently, and children who find amusement in brief, improvised games. These moments, though fleeting, reveal the enduring human instinct to care, cooperate, and maintain identity, even in environments designed to suppress both. Yet such acts are always measured against potential repercussions. Trust is fragile, and each interaction carries weight. Authority, omnipresent from the start, becomes increasingly nuanced. The matron's gaze, once a simple marker of oversight, is now a tool of psychological management. The master's ledger, which at first seemed merely administrative, now shapes labor, rations, and even social positioning. You observe how the mechanisms of control are both bureaucratic and intimate. A reduction in bread rations, the reassignment of tasks, a brief word of praise or reprimand all serve to maintain order while subtly shaping behavior. Compliance is rewarded in small increments, creating a system where endurance, discretion, and adaptability are the primary currencies of survival. Despite this, moments of resistance persist, small and almost imperceptible. A child hides a scrap of cloth to create a toy. A woman memorizes a passage from a book for private reflection. A man quietly hums a song from outside the walls. These acts are neither overt rebellion nor direct defiance. They are strategies of psychological survival, reminders that identity can persist even under constraint. In observing them, you begin to understand the subtle interplay between authority and autonomy, structure and spirit. The workhouse, in its meticulous control, cannot entirely extinguish human resilience. As the seasons change, you notice the rhythms of the year within these walls. Winters are particularly harsh. Cold seeps through uninsulated walls, rations are less abundant, and illness spreads more rapidly. Summers, though warmer, do little to alleviate monotony. The long hours of labor continue, and the basic structure remains unyielding. Special occasions, if they exist at all, are modest, often marked by small allowances in food or brief reprieves in routine. These rare instances remind you that life persists, but only minimally. Survival is measured not in comfort or joy, but in the maintenance of bodily integrity, mental stability, and the quiet preservation of self. By the end of this period, a quiet transformation has taken place. The newcomer who arrived bewildered and apprehensive has become attuned to the rhythms, hierarchies, and routines of the workhouse. You have learned which tasks are manageable, how to conserve energy, and how to navigate interpersonal dynamics. Your body has adapted to physical hardship. Your mind has learned to anticipate authority, strategize small acts of autonomy, and protect emotional reserves. Yet this adaptation carries a cost, a subtle reshaping of expectations, a recalibration of hope, and a quiet resignation to the limitations imposed by this environment. The workhouse, then, is both a place of endurance and education. It teaches lessons in physical resilience, social navigation, and the careful management of emotion. It also enforces an understanding of hierarchy, control, and the costs of poverty in Victorian society. By design, it creates individuals who can survive extreme deprivation, but often at the expense of freedom, spontaneity, and personal agency. The experience is formative, leaving a mark that extends beyond the walls and into the broader trajectory of life. Looking back, it becomes clear that the workhouse embodies a paradox. It is both harsh and instructive, oppressive yet revealing of human tenacity. Within its rigid structure, inhabitants discover the limits of endurance, the subtleties of social negotiation, and the quiet persistence of identity. The building itself, with its austere dormitories, regimented dining halls, and laborious workrooms, is not merely a physical space, but a reflection of societal attitudes toward poverty, morality, and responsibility. It shapes not only daily survival, but the broader understanding of what it means to endure. And so, as you prepare to leave or perhaps simply to rest for another day, you carry forward both the lessons and the scars of this experience. The workhouse is not merely a memory of deprivation. It is a mirror of resilience, revealing how ordinary people navigate extraordinary constraint. Yet one question lingers, almost imperceptibly. How did such a system, intended to control and correct, influence the wider trajectory of those who endured it? And what traces of its logic persist in the ways society understands poverty and survival today? Story 2: Rations and Regulations. Life by the spoonful. You awaken to the sound of the workhouse bell, its clanging cutting through the stillness of the dormitory. Even before your eyes open fully, the scent of porridge drifting from the dining hall reaches you, a thin, watery aroma that has become the defining smell of mornings here. The food is simple, functional, and calculated, enough to sustain the body but not enough to allow comfort or indulgence. It is the first lesson of the day, a subtle but persistent reminder of how the workhouse structures every element of life. Breakfast is served promptly. A matron or assistant calls names while the inmates form an orderly line, bowls clutched in cold hands. The porridge is barely thick, the flavor a distant echo of oats rather than sustenance. You observe the variations in distribution. Some receive slightly more, some slightly less. Small differences like this are never accidental. They are tools of regulation and observation. Eating quickly can attract attention, but dawdling is equally noticeable. Even at this early hour, your body and mind are taught discipline through the simple act of consuming food. The rations are not merely food, they are instruments of control. Each portion is measured to the gram, each serving calculated to prevent surplus while discouraging waste. The nutritional content is minimal. Calories are sufficient for labor but leave the body hungry by mid-afternoon. You notice how people adapt. Some eat slowly to stretch a small portion. Others conserve scraps for later. Meals become exercises in strategy as much as sustenance. Hunger, in this context, is not merely physical but also psychological, a constant companion that shapes behavior, compliance, and social interaction. Beyond the food itself, the rituals surrounding it are equally rigid. The dining hall is silent save for the clatter of utensils and the occasional instruction from an overseer. Hands must be washed in a specific manner, elbows kept off the tables, and posture maintained. Children are observed closely. Any hint of restlessness or disobedience is met with correction. You realize that eating here is not a private act but a regulated performance, a demonstration of compliance, patience, and respect for authority. The workhouse diet follows strict seasonal adjustments. In winter, potatoes, cabbage, and thin porridge dominate. Meat is rare and usually reserved for those working the hardest or exhibiting exemplary behavior. Summer brings slightly more variety, occasional pulses or dried fruits, yet nothing that resembles abundance. Preservation is a constant concern. The storage of food must prevent spoilage, and rationing ensures supplies last the week. These practical measures, designed for economy, create a rhythm in daily life. Hunger is cyclical, predictable, and inescapable, teaching all inmates the subtle ways in which scarcity defines their existence. Meals are also opportunities to observe the unspoken hierarchy among inmates. Those who have been inside longer often know when a matron is lenient, which spoonfuls may be stretched, and how to share scraps discreetly. Newcomers are watched as they navigate these unspoken rules, often fumbling in the early days. The workhouse, in its calculated austerity, fosters not only survival skills but also social acuity. Reading subtle cues, predicting reactions, and managing behavior are as critical as enduring hunger. After breakfast, work assignments are issued. Here again, regulation intersects with survival. Tasks are prescribed with precision. Men may be sent to mend fences, chop wood, or break stones. Women spin, sew, and clean. Children carry water, sweep floors, or assist in kitchens. Every task is supervised, every action noted, and every deviation potentially punished. Labor is rigorous, but the rules governing it are equally significant. Compliance, punctuality, and efficiency are continuously monitored, teaching inmates that survival is inseparable from obedience. Food and work are deeply intertwined. Those who perform tasks well may earn small rewards, perhaps an extra spoonful of porridge or a slightly more comfortable placement in the dormitory. Those who falter may face ration reductions or reassignment to more arduous labor. These micro-rewards and penalties create a constant feedback loop, conditioning behavior while enforcing hierarchy. Hunger, labor, and observation are woven together into a relentless, inescapable rhythm. Discipline extends beyond meals and labor to the minutiae of daily conduct. Dormitories must be kept clean and orderly, clothing repaired regularly, personal items stored discreetly. Time is tightly regimented. Waking, eating, labor, and rest follow precise schedules marked by bells. This structure may seem monotonous, but its subtle power lies in its consistency. The predictability is both comforting and oppressive. Inmates can anticipate what is required, yet the rigid structure suppresses spontaneity, free thought, and autonomy. Small acts of ingenuity emerge in response. Inmates learn to conserve scraps, mend clothing creatively, and share water or other limited resources discreetly. Children devise minor games that occupy brief intervals between labor. Adults find ways to carve small moments of privacy. Even within the rigid rationing and regulations, strategies of survival persist. These acts, though small, reveal resilience and adaptability. The human instinct to assert agency, even subtly, in an environment designed to restrict it entirely. Health, of course, is closely tied to the provision of food. Malnutrition is a persistent threat. Bodies weakened by insufficient calories are more susceptible to cold, disease, and injury. In this sense, rations serve not only as sustenance but as an indirect method of control. The hunger itself reinforces compliance and shapes behavior. Observing these patterns, you realize that the workhouse operates as a finely tuned mechanism where diet, labor, and discipline are inseparable. Survival is always contingent, dependent upon careful attention to rules, routines, and relationships. Evenings are quieter but no less structured. Dinner resembles breakfast in its simplicity: bread, cabbage, or thin broth served at the precise hour. Conversation is minimal, voices low, movements deliberate. You notice the subtle markers of hierarchy reinforced at these times. Who receives attention from the matron? Who is allowed minor indulgences? Who is observed most closely? Every action within the workhouse, including the most mundane acts of eating and walking, is encoded with meaning. The rules extend far beyond the written regulations. They govern behavior, perception, and even thought. As night falls, you reflect on the cumulative weight of these small but relentless structures. Meals that are barely adequate, labor that is physically demanding and carefully monitored, rules that shape every aspect of behavior. They are instruments of survival and control simultaneously. Yet within these constraints, small human responses persist: sharing, planning, quiet humor, and discreet defiance. Hunger and regulation impose limits, but they cannot entirely extinguish resourcefulness or the impulse to maintain dignity. And so, as you settle into bed, pondering the thin porridge of the day and the rules that governed its distribution, one question persists: how will the endless cycle of measured rations and meticulous regulation affect not only the body, but the mind and spirit over months or years? Will resilience strengthen under these pressures, or will the constant deprivation and surveillance quietly reshape who you are? By the second week of life in the workhouse, you begin to understand the subtle, often invisible ways that rations and rules govern existence. What initially appeared as merely thin porridge or strict schedules now reveals itself as a pervasive system designed to shape every action, thought, and interaction. Hunger is constant, but it is also instructive. You learn to anticipate when portions will be largest, how to pace your eating, and when it is safest to conserve scraps for later. These small calculations, repeated daily, become as essential to survival as the labor itself. The structure of meals, though monotonous, is deceptively complex in its impact. Children, especially, are keenly attuned to these routines. They observe the placement of extra bread, note when a supervisor's attention wanders, and memorize the timing of leniencies. Even subtle shifts in rationing can trigger strategic responses: saving a portion for another meal, trading small items, or quietly asking for help. In this way, food becomes both sustenance and social currency. Each spoonful carries not only calories, but implications for relationships, hierarchy, and the capacity to endure. For adults, the calculus is similarly nuanced. Hunger must be balanced against labor demands. Work too slowly and punishment follows. Work too quickly and energy is depleted for the remainder of the day. Some develop personal systems for rationing, dividing portions into smaller segments, packing consumption during work breaks, or trading small favors for extra bread. Observation becomes crucial. You notice which supervisors are stricter, which fellow inmates might share scraps, and where minor indulgences are possible without attracting censure. Survival is a combination of compliance, prudence, and careful negotiation. Illness, unsurprisingly, complicates the calculus. Those who fall sick are weakened not only by fatigue but by inadequate nutrition. A mild fever, ordinarily manageable, becomes a serious risk when your body is already depleted. Infirmary care is minimal, offering only basic remedies such as gruel, herbal infusions, or bed rest. Deaths occur quietly, often recorded as statistical entries rather than mourned, yet their presence is a constant reminder of the stakes. The sick are doubly vulnerable, physically weakened and socially marginalized, drawing attention only when compliance falters or labor expectations are unmet. Children, too, develop coping strategies. Some invent small games to pass time between meals. Others memorize brief prayers or verses from books salvaged from corners of the workhouse. These acts are neither sanctioned nor acknowledged. They are private refuges, a means of preserving mental and emotional equilibrium. Even minor achievements, such as finishing a task efficiently or securing an extra piece of bread, carry disproportionate significance. Small victories become crucial to sustaining morale, reminding inmates that autonomy, however limited, is still possible. Food is not the only regulated resource. Water, warmth, and clothing are similarly controlled. In winter, blankets are few and shared, and warmth must be negotiated subtly sitting near stoves, sharing heat with neighbors, or timing activity to conserve energy. Clothing, often threadbare, is repaired repeatedly. Rips or stains are punished as neglect. Every material need intersects with the same principle as rations. Scarcity is a teacher, shaping behavior through constraint. You learn that comfort is conditional, granted by compliance, effort, and subtle social navigation. The cumulative effect of these regulations is both physical and psychological. Bodies adapt to minimal sustenance, but the mind becomes attuned to constant observation. Every act of eating, every scrap preserved, every deviation from routine carries potential consequences. Anxiety, however subdued, becomes a constant companion. Even small successes, the careful management of a ration, the quiet sharing of a portion, the avoidance of punishment, carry relief and pride. The workhouse enforces not only hunger but vigilance, a persistent awareness of how every action interacts with authority and peers. Social hierarchies, though informal, are reinforced by these daily struggles. Those who can manage rations well, anticipate shortages, or demonstrate endurance often gain subtle influence among peers. Experienced inmates quietly mentor newcomers, passing on knowledge about supervisors' preferences, methods for conserving food, and strategies for avoiding reprimand. Authority within the dormitories is not formalized, yet it emerges naturally as those who master survival quietly shape the behavior of others. Observation and experience become currency as valuable as physical strength or labor output. Seasonal changes magnify these pressures. In winter, caloric demands rise even as rations shrink. Colds and flu spread rapidly, exacerbated by the close quarters. Summer, while less physically punishing, brings its own constraints. The heat is stifling in unventilated dormitories, water is rationed, and flies infest meals. Adaptation requires continual vigilance. Strategies that worked in one season may fail in another, forcing constant recalibration. Survival is iterative, a daily negotiation between body, mind, and the environment. Despite these hardships, quiet acts of ingenuity and community persist. Children protect one another, adults share food discreetly, and some individuals develop ingenious methods to stretch rations. A piece of bread may be divided carefully over multiple meals, water rationed for maximum utility, or clothing patched repeatedly. These acts are small rebellions against the absolute control of the system, asserting human agency in even the most constrained circumstances. They also carry subtle psychological benefits: hope, pride, and the maintenance of identity. By midweek, patterns emerge. You notice which meals are most predictable, which tasks require careful packing, and which supervisors are most forgiving. These observations are essential. A misstep in ration management or labor performance can carry consequences far beyond the immediate moment: loss of food, increased workload, or disciplinary action. Through careful attention and adaptation, you begin to internalize the rhythms of the workhouse, developing an internal map of opportunity, risk, and survival. Yet the workhouse's lessons are double-edged. The strategies that ensure survival may also erode spontaneity, generosity, or trust. Self-preservation becomes a skill that is sometimes in tension with human empathy. In this environment, small acts of kindness, sharing bread, offering a comforting word, carry risk, yet remain vital for morale. The tension between compliance, resource management, and interpersonal bonds is relentless, teaching that survival is rarely solitary but always conditional. As the day draws to a close, you reflect on the quiet power of these regulations. What appears at first to be mundane, the timing of meals, the quantity of porridge, the scheduling of labor, is in fact a comprehensive system designed to shape not just behavior but thought, expectation, and identity. Survival demands constant calculation: how to consume, how to labor, how to interact, how to conserve energy and resources. Every day is both a physical and mental exercise, and the lessons learned accumulate subtly, reshaping perception and priorities. And yet, as you settle into bed with the residual ache of hunger and labor pressing upon you, one question remains unresolved. Over the months and years, how will these strategies for coping with scarcity and regulation influence the mind and spirit? Will they instill resilience and ingenuity, or will the unyielding system slowly erode trust, empathy, and the sense of self that survives outside these walls? Weeks turn into months, and the cycles of rations, labor, and regulation become nearly instinctive. You know exactly when the bell will ring, how many spoonfuls will be served, and how best to navigate the subtle expectations of the matron or overseer. What once seemed arbitrary, the timing of meals, the distribution of porridge, the packing of tasks, now forms a precise rhythm that governs both body and mind. Survival has become a science, learned in increments through careful observation, strategy, and repetition. Hunger, always present, is now internalized. The body adapts to scarcity, slowing metabolism, conserving energy, and tolerating long stretches between meals. Yet even as your body adjusts, the mind remains vigilant. You calculate every action, anticipate outcomes, and plan around scarcity. The regulation of food teaches lessons far beyond nutrition: patience, discretion, resilience, and social navigation. Every interaction, from borrowing a scrap of bread to negotiating shared labor, carries potential consequences, and you learn to weigh them carefully. These lessons, however, are not without cost. The constant awareness of scarcity, the need for vigilance, and the pressure to comply reshape the way you interact with others. Trust becomes provisional, kindness calculated, and generosity circumscribed. In small ways, the workhouse teaches a survivalist mentality. Self-preservation is paramount, and the demands of the institution outweigh personal inclinations. Yet paradoxically, the same environment nurtures ingenuity. Those who endure develop strategies for stretching rations, conserving energy, and subtly negotiating authority. Even within extreme constraint, the human mind seeks opportunity, and the inventive acts of survival become a quiet form of resistance. Children in particular show remarkable adaptation. By observing the patterns of distribution, they learn to anticipate portions, conserve resources, and seek small advantages. Games emerge in unexpected spaces, A scrap of cloth becomes a toy, a whispered song provides brief solace, and shared stories maintain a sense of continuity with the world outside. These acts are more than distraction, they are mechanisms for sustaining morale, creativity, and the mind's resilience. In these small moments, you see how even the harshest regulations cannot fully suppress the instinct to play, imagine, and endure. Discipline remains constant and multifaceted. Punishments for perceived infractions, eating too quickly, wasting food, or failing in labor are not always overt, but their effects are clear. Reduction in rations, reassignment to harder tasks, or verbal reprimands subtly reinforce compliance. Yet over time, these rules, rigid as they are, create predictable patterns. You learn to anticipate enforcement, exploit small leniencies, and protect yourself from both overt and covert consequences. The result is an uneasy mastery. The workhouse shapes behavior without necessarily crushing will entirely. Health continues to be both fragile and fragilely managed. Illness spreads quickly, and malnutrition amplifies vulnerability. Those who falter physically risk not only suffering but marginalization within the community of inmates. In this environment, observation and preventive measures become critical. Packing work, conserving strength, and carefully managing portions all become essential survival techniques. By contrast, minor ingenuity such as rationing small scraps, sharing food discreetly, or assisting a weaker peer can provide both sustenance and psychological benefit, reinforcing the interconnectedness of survival strategies. Over time, the repetitive cycles of meals, work, and oversight leave their imprint on character. Resilience becomes second nature, adaptability an unconscious skill, and vigilance a constant companion. Yet the subtle psychological toll is evident. Heightened caution in interactions, cautious optimism, and the careful management of hope. Those who emerge from the workhouse carry these lessons forward into life beyond the walls. The ability to navigate scarcity, negotiate authority, and endure hardship. At the same time, some may carry residual effects of prolonged surveillance and rationing, including anxiety, hypervigilance, or a tempered sense of trust. The workhouse, in its strict and measured approach, leaves no aspect of life untouched. Every meal teaches a lesson in patience, compliance, and foresight. Every ration spoonful is a reminder of scarcity, authority, and the consequences of inattention. Labor, discipline, and hierarchy intertwine to form an environment where survival requires both physical endurance and psychological agility. And yet, even in the most controlled conditions, human creativity and resilience persist in subtle, meaningful ways. Children's games, quiet acts of generosity, and inventive coping strategies remind you that agency, while constrained, is never entirely eliminated. Historically, the Victorian workhouse system illustrates society's approach to poverty and morality. By enforcing strict rations and rigid schedules, authorities sought to teach industry, frugality, and obedience. The outcomes, however, were complex. While many inmates developed survival skills, discipline, and resilience, the system also exposed them to chronic deprivation, illness, and psychological strain. These experiences shaped generations, influencing not only personal trajectories, but also public perceptions of poverty, labor, and social responsibility. As you reflect on the cumulative effects of rations and regulations, it becomes clear that the workhouse operated as more than a shelter for the destitute. It was a microcosm of Victorian social philosophy. Food, labor, and discipline were intertwined not only to sustain life, but to mold character. Survival required attentiveness, ingenuity, and endurance. The lessons learned extended far beyond the workhouse walls, leaving enduring traces on the minds, bodies, and behaviors of those who lived under its strict regimen. And yet, even in this historical reflection, a question lingers. Could a system so meticulously designed to enforce survival and morality ever truly account for the human capacity for compassion, ingenuity, and resilience? Or did the very rigidity of the workhouse both suppress and reveal these qualities in equal measure, shaping not only who endured, but the society that emerged in its shadow. Story 3. The Matron's Watchful Eye, Authority and Discipline. The first thing you notice upon entering the workhouse is her presence, though she rarely speaks. The matron moves through the dormitories and workrooms like a shadow, an omnipresent figure whose gaze seems to measure not just your actions but your intentions. Her uniform is simple but authoritative. A dark, stiff dress, a white apron meticulously starched, a cap framing her face with rigid precision. Everything about her communicates order, control, and the expectation of absolute compliance. In Victorian workhouses, the matron was more than a caretaker. She was the embodiment of discipline. Her authority was both formal and psychological. She administered punishment when rules were broken, rewarded compliance with subtle approval, and maintained constant observation of the inmates' behaviors. Men, women, and children alike learned quickly that survival depended not merely on completing tasks, but on interpreting her expectations, anticipating her presence, and responding to her gaze with careful deference. Her morning rounds begin before breakfast. You see her inspecting bedding, checking for neatness, cleanliness, and order. She moves swiftly, her eyes scanning rows of narrow beds. Every folded blanket, every aligned pillow, every neatly stacked pair of shoes is noted, approval or disapproval recorded silently, sometimes enforced immediately, sometimes deferred. Even in her silence, the matron teaches. You realize that nothing escapes notice. Small lapses in tidiness can attract a sharp word or, in more extreme cases, the reduction of rations or reassignment to laborious duties. Children in particular feel the weight of her oversight. She observes them as they line up for breakfast, ensuring proper posture, quiet conversation, and compliance with dining etiquette. Those who fidget, speak out of turn, or show impatience are subtly corrected. Sometimes a stern glance or a sharp word suffices. Other times, a child is sent to perform extra chores. It is a constant lesson in authority and self-regulation. You begin to understand that the matron's role is both guardian and enforcer, shaping behavior through visibility and consistency. Labor is no less closely monitored. In the workrooms, her presence or that of her assistants is an unspoken constant. Sewing, mending, or spinning must be executed with precision. Stone breaking, hauling, or scrubbing floors must be performed with both speed and attention to detail. Errors are not only noted but recorded. Punishments are calibrated, designed to correct behavior without risking rebellion. The matron's authority is thus both subtle and absolute. She does not need to raise her voice for control to be effective. Her gaze alone is sufficient to instill compliance. Observation extends beyond work. She monitors meals, dormitories, hygiene, and even casual interactions among inmates. Conversations are brief and cautious. Eye contact is measured. Even minor infractions, a whispered comment, an untied shoe, a misaligned garment can be interpreted as defiance. Under her watch, awareness of self becomes constant. Every movement, gesture, and expression is filtered through the understanding that authority is omnipresent. In this environment, survival requires a combination of attentiveness, discretion, and adaptation. Despite the rigidity, there is method to her authority. The matron's discipline is intended not only to enforce rules but to teach endurance, responsibility, and moral conduct, according to Victorian social philosophy. Poverty was often viewed as a moral failing, and the workhouse sought to correct these deficiencies. Labor, rationing, and surveillance were tools designed to instill habits of industry and obedience. While harsh, the methods were systematic, reflecting a broader belief in structured guidance as a means of moral and practical improvement. You notice how subtle variations in her behavior influence the environment. A rare nod of approval or a quiet word of encouragement can be as meaningful as punishment, signaling that compliance and attentiveness are recognized. Conversely, a stern glance can ripple through a dormitory or workroom, shifting behavior, posture, and mood instantly. Her authority operates both formally, through rules and enforcement, and psychologically, through the perception of constant oversight. You begin to sense that understanding her rhythms, moods, and expectations is as important as performing assigned tasks. Children learn quickly that compliance brings relative comfort. Those who anticipate the matron's routines, who prepare for inspection, and who follow rules precisely are less likely to receive punitive tasks or verbal reprimands. In this way, authority teaches not only obedience but strategy. It is not enough to follow instructions mechanically. One must also read the nuances of enforcement and adjust behavior accordingly. Small victories, such as completing chores efficiently or responding politely to her presence, carry disproportionate significance, reinforcing patterns of behavior that ensure survival. Adults, too, adapt. They learn which tasks invite scrutiny, which supervisors are more lenient, and when discretion is safest. Observation becomes a skill as critical as labor itself. Compliance is not always passive. It is a carefully calculated balance between adherence, subtle assertion of autonomy, and psychological endurance. You realize that the matron, though singular in authority, inadvertently cultivates ingenuity. Those who survive and maintain relative comfort develop an intimate understanding of human behavior, authority, and negotiation. Health and hygiene, too, are monitored. The matron inspects dormitories for cleanliness, examines children for signs of illness, and ensures that minor injuries are addressed, at least minimally. Her oversight serves dual purposes. It enforces order and reduces risks of epidemics that could disrupt labor and compromise survival. Yet even in her vigilance, resources are limited. Remedies are basic, and comfort is minimal. The workhouse teaches that health, like compliance, must be managed carefully and strategically. By midday, the pattern is clear. Meals, labor, inspections, and rest are intertwined with oversight. Every action is observed, every task evaluated, and every interaction carries potential consequences. The matron's presence is both invisible and undeniable, shaping the rhythm of life in ways that extend far beyond the immediate tasks at hand. Inhabitants learn to anticipate, adapt, and manage themselves in a constant state of measured awareness. As evening approaches, the quiet tension persists. Even as labor ends and meals are consumed, the sense of being watched lingers. Every gesture, every word, every posture has been internalized and scrutinized over months of exposure. You realize that her authority is not only immediate but cumulative. Over time, it shapes not just behavior but the mind itself. Obedience becomes instinctive, vigilance habitual, the rhythm of life intertwined with the perception of constant oversight. Yet even in this environment, subtle resistance and resilience emerge. Small acts, quietly finishing chores slightly faster, conserving scraps of food, or sharing warmth with a child persist alongside compliance. The matron's presence enforces structure and discipline, but it cannot entirely suppress ingenuity, empathy, or human adaptation. Within strict boundaries, survival strategies evolve. The challenge is continuous: to obey sufficiently to avoid punishment, yet to maintain enough autonomy and agency to preserve selfhood. By the end of your first week under her gaze, you begin to sense the deeper lesson. Authority in the workhouse is as much psychological as it is practical. The matron's oversight teaches endurance, strategy, and observation, shaping the individual in ways that extend far beyond immediate labor or ration compliance. Adaptation is not optional, it is survival. Yet you cannot help but wonder, as the months pass, will the constant scrutiny and expectation erode resilience or strengthen it? How does living under such unrelenting authority change not just actions, but thought, perception, and identity? Weeks pass, and the matron's presence becomes a constant, almost invisible backdrop to every moment of daily life. The dormitories, workrooms, and dining halls are no longer merely physical spaces. They have transformed into arenas of psychological negotiation. You notice that every movement, every gesture, and even every glance is filtered through the lens of authority. The workhouse, under her supervision, is not simply a place of labor and sustenance. It is a system designed to shape thought, behavior, and expectation. The mental toll of constant oversight is subtle yet pervasive. You find yourself anticipating the matron's gaze before it even falls, adjusting posture, expression, and speed in preparation. A casual conversation with a fellow inmate is measured carefully, every word weighed for potential scrutiny. The mind becomes a tool of self-regulation, constantly evaluating risk, predicting reactions, and strategizing behavior. Fatigue is not only physical, it is cognitive, the result of continuous vigilance required merely to avoid disapproval or punishment. Children are particularly affected. They learn early to interpret facial expressions, tone of voice, and subtle movements. The slightest hint of a frown or raised eyebrow can signify impending correction, prompting immediate adjustment in posture or speech. These lessons are reinforced daily. Misbehavior, however minor, is observed, noted, and sometimes punished. Over time, children internalize this vigilance, developing a heightened awareness that shapes not only immediate behavior but long-term cognitive and emotional patterns. Adults, too, adapt in remarkable ways. Those who endure the longest become masters of anticipation, predicting which tasks will invite scrutiny and how best to navigate interactions with authority. Compliance is strategic, not merely passive. You notice small patterns. Certain supervisors are lenient at specific times, small errors can be quietly corrected without notice, and subtle acts of efficiency are rewarded with minor privileges. Survival in this environment is as much a mental exercise as a physical one, requiring observation, calculation, and careful negotiation of interpersonal dynamics. Yet the constant vigilance exacts a cost. Anxiety becomes an almost permanent companion, particularly for new arrivals. You feel a low-grade tension in every action when speaking, when walking, when performing even the simplest chores. Every decision carries weight, every minor infraction amplified by the omnipresence of authority. Over time, this tension accumulates, manifesting as irritability, fatigue, and quiet resignation. The body may endure, but the mind is continuously engaged in risk assessment and behavioral management. Punishments, though generally measured, are effective in reinforcing vigilance. An inattentive glance, a misaligned garment, or a lapse in cleanliness can result in verbal reprimands, reassignment to more arduous tasks, or reduction of rations. The logic is consistent. Every consequence teaches a lesson, reinforcing the notion that survival depends not only on labor, but on the mastery of rules and expectation. Over time, you internalize these lessons, creating a mental map of authority and its boundaries, a map that governs behavior with precision. Even subtle acts of resistance are carefully calibrated. You notice how children develop minor games or routines that occupy the mind and preserve a sense of autonomy without attracting attention. Adults find ways to negotiate small freedoms, conserving energy during work, trading minor favors with peers, or quietly stretching rations. These strategies are not rebellious in the overt sense, they are acts of survival, balancing compliance with the maintenance of identity. In an environment dominated by authority, ingenuity becomes both necessary and invisible. The social dynamics within this framework of oversight are complex. Inmates learn to observe one another as closely as they observe authority, knotting alliances, vulnerabilities, and strategies for evading scrutiny. Trust is provisional, built slowly and often tested. Acts of solidarity, sharing food, offering guidance, or assisting with chores occur discreetly, carefully calibrated to avoid attracting punitive attention. In this way, the workhouse fosters a subtle social intelligence, the ability to read human behavior, anticipate actions, and negotiate relationships under constraint. Mealtimes are microcosms of authority and strategy. Each ration portion is measured not just for sustenance, but as a tool for teaching patience, obedience, and social navigation. Children learn to pace their consumption, observe supervisors, and share carefully. Adults develop similar tactics, conserving food, offering small assistance, or subtly negotiating for minor indulgences. Hunger is thus both physical and social a force that shapes interaction, observation, and decision-making. The cumulative effect of constant oversight is profound. You recognize that adaptation is essential, yet it comes with trade-offs. Vigilance and compliance strengthen survival, but they also erode spontaneity and alter perception. The mind becomes trained to anticipate authority, calculate risk, and regulate emotion continuously. This psychological conditioning is subtle but powerful. It shapes not only immediate behavior but the framework through which you interpret the world. The lessons of survival in the workhouse extend far beyond labor or ration management. They are lessons in self-regulation, resilience, and strategic observation. Yet even under such pressure, human ingenuity persists. Children craft minor diversions, adults conserve energy and resources, and small acts of kindness continue to emerge. These moments, though fleeting, offer glimpses of agency within constraint. They remind you that even the most unyielding authority cannot entirely suppress creativity, empathy, or the instinct to preserve identity. Adaptation is not synonymous with submission. It is survival guided by observation, strategy, and subtle resistance. As the day concludes, you reflect on the paradox of the matron's authority. Her vigilance enforces order, discipline, and compliance, yet it also inadvertently cultivates resilience, observation, and ingenuity. In shaping behavior through oversight, she produces individuals who are attentive, strategic, and capable of navigating complexity, but who may also carry the psychological imprint of constant surveillance. The workhouse teaches endurance not only through labor and rations, but through continuous mental and emotional negotiation. And yet, one question remains unresolved, hovering like the quiet weight of her gaze. How will prolonged exposure to this constant oversight affect the mind and spirit over time? Will resilience be strengthened by careful observation and adaptation, or will the relentless scrutiny erode trust, spontaneity, and the capacity for hope? The answers, like the workhouse itself, are never simple and must be discovered over the months and years of daily endurance. Months in the workhouse pass with an almost imperceptible rhythm, dictated by bells, tasks, and the ever-watchful gaze of the matron. You no longer notice her presence consciously. It has become a part of the environment, as fundamental as the walls or the thin bedding. Yet her influence persists, shaping every movement, every decision, and every thought. By now, survival has become a delicate interplay of obedience, observation, and calculated autonomy. Every day is measured not just in labor or rations, but in vigilance mental, emotional, and social. The lessons of authority have taken root. You know instinctively which actions will attract scrutiny, which phrases in conversation are safe, and how to pace tasks to balance efficiency with energy conservation. Small strategies conserving scraps of food, dividing labor among peers, or quietly assisting a weaker inmate become essential survival skills. Compliance is never passive. It is learned, deliberate, and adaptive. The matron's oversight, while strict, has inadvertently trained resilience, foresight, and subtle ingenuity. Her presence, omnipresent and unyielding, molds behavior as much as it monitors it. Yet the mental and emotional costs are undeniable. Constant observation has left a lingering tension, an undercurrent of vigilance that persists even when the matron is not immediately present. You notice how simple decisions, how to speak, when to eat, where to sit, are filtered through the lessons learned under her supervision. Trust is tentative, generosity calculated, and spontaneity often subdued. Even small victories are measured against the risk of punishment, creating a persistent internal balance between risk and reward. The workhouse, in this sense, is as much a psychological crucible as a physical one. The children show remarkable adaptation. They anticipate authority, negotiate small freedoms, and develop games or routines that provide brief reprieves from strict surveillance. These acts of quiet autonomy are crucial. They preserve morale, creativity, and the sense of self. Adults, too, develop methods to protect mental equilibrium. Observation, strategy, and subtle negotiation become second nature. In these ways, the oppressive authority of the matron fosters skills that extend far beyond the workhouse. Ingenuity, attentiveness, and resilience emerge from constraint, even as other qualities, trust, spontaneity, emotional openness, are tested and sometimes diminished. Punishments, whether immediate or deferred, continue to reinforce the lessons of obedience. A misaligned bed, a mismanaged ration, or a careless word may result in extra labor, reduced food, or a reprimand. Over time, the fear of censure becomes a guiding principle, shaping thought as much as behavior. Compliance is rewarded, deviation punished, and the boundary between the two is learned through experience. Yet within this structured system, small acts of defiance or subtle resistance emerge. A child hides a scrap of cloth for a game, an adult shares a portion of bread, a group coordinates minor efficiencies to ease labor. These acts, though modest, demonstrate the persistent human impulse to assert agency, even under extreme constraint. Health and labor remain closely intertwined with authority. Overworked, undernourished bodies are more susceptible to illness, and any weakness invites scrutiny. The matron's vigilance is partly practical. Ensuring hygiene and monitoring health reduces the risk of epidemics that could disrupt operations. Yet it is also symbolic, reinforcing the notion that survival requires both physical and behavioral discipline. Every task, every ration, every glance carries implicit lessons. Compliance sustains life, and vigilance ensures stability. By the end of the first year, you begin to notice the enduring imprint of this constant supervision. Adaptation has become instinctive. Behavior is calculated, interactions are measured, and vigilance persists even in moments of privacy. The matron's authority, while immediate and visible, has achieved a more profound effect. The internalization of order, the shaping of self-discipline, and the subtle conditioning of the mind to navigate constraint. What began as external oversight has become an internalized framework for survival. Historically, the workhouse system, and the authority wielded by matrons, reflects Victorian attitudes toward poverty, morality, and social responsibility. Poverty was perceived not simply as a lack of resources, but as a moral and behavioral deficiency to be corrected through labor, regulation, and surveillance. Matrons, tasked with overseeing the daily lives of inmates, embodied this philosophy. Their presence disciplined the body, regulated the mind, and enforced social hierarchies. The lessons of obedience, endurance, and strategy were as central as the lessons of labor or ration management. Yet the legacy is paradoxical. On one hand, strict oversight cultivated resilience, adaptability, and social intelligence. Inmates learned to navigate rules, anticipate consequences, and assert subtle agency within constrained circumstances. On the other hand, the relentless pressure of surveillance, punishment, and behavioral regulation left emotional and psychological marks. Anxiety, hypervigilance, and cautiousness became ingrained, shaping interactions and perceptions long after leaving the institution. The workhouse was therefore both formative and constraining, teaching essential survival skills while imposing long-term behavioral and cognitive effects. Small acts of ingenuity, empathy, and subtle resistance reveal the limits of authority. Despite the matron's gaze, children created games, adults devised strategies, and quiet solidarity persisted. These acts remind us that human resilience is rarely extinguished by strict oversight. Authority can shape behavior, condition responses, and enforce compliance, but it cannot entirely suppress imagination, care, or ingenuity. Even in a system designed to regulate every aspect of life, the human instinct to endure and adapt remains irrepressible. Reflecting on the broader historical significance, the matron's authority offers a window into the intersection of social control and human resilience. It illustrates how institutions shape behavior not only through rules and labor, but through sustained psychological oversight. Authority, applied consistently and pervasively, molds habits, expectations, and perceptions. Yet it also inadvertently cultivates skills that extend beyond the institution: observation, calculation, adaptability, and subtle negotiation. These dual outcomes, discipline and resilience, define much of the workhouse experience. And so, as the long day ends and the dormitories quiet, one final question lingers. To what extent does the careful balance between oversight and survival prepare individuals for life beyond the workhouse? Does the cultivation of resilience under authority equip them for freedom, or does it leave a lasting imprint of vigilance, caution, and constrained autonomy that echoes far beyond the walls? The answer, like the workhouse itself, remains complex, subtle, and deeply human. Story 4: Children Behind Bars. First encounters with the workhouse. You are small, thin, and bewildered. The day you arrive at the workhouse, everything feels enormous and alien. The high, bare walls, the rows of beds stacked like miniature cells, and the echoing clamor of hundreds of other children and adults moving through routine. There is a smell that is immediately recognizable, a mix of cold stone, unwashed bodies, and thin porridge cooking in enormous cauldrons. You quickly learn that nothing here is comforting. Everything is functional, calculated to maintain order rather than warmth. Your first impressions are shaped as much by observation as by sensation. The older children seem to move with a careful, almost ritualized precision, anticipating the matron and her assistants, keeping their heads down and following the subtle rhythms of labor and inspection. Newcomers like yourself are watched closely. A misstep, a stumble while forming a line, a whispered comment, or the delay in folding blankets draws immediate attention. The matron's gaze is relentless. She does not speak unless necessary, but her presence communicates authority with clarity. Compliance is survival, defiance is costly. Meals are a particularly formative experience. Breakfast is thin porridge, barely warm, served in metal bowls that clang against the table. You watch older children pace themselves, eating sparingly, saving portions for later, or sharing small scraps with a sibling or friend. Hunger is constant, but it is also instructive. Every bite is a lesson in patience, observation, and strategy. Some children manage to secure a small advantage, a longer sip of gruel, a second piece of bread, by reading the overseer's attention or negotiating subtly with peers. These small victories, though seemingly insignificant, carry a profound sense of accomplishment. Labor begins shortly after meals. You are assigned tasks based on age and apparent ability. Children sweep floors, carry water, clean utensils, or assist in kitchens. Even these seemingly simple chores are subject to scrutiny. Tasks are timed, inspected, and repeated until deemed satisfactory. The repetition is exhausting, but it teaches precision, endurance, and discipline. Mistakes are corrected immediately, often publicly, reinforcing both skill and the social hierarchy. Over time, you recognize that mastery of these tasks is inseparable from survival. Efficiency is rewarded with minor privileges, errors punished with additional labor or reduced rations. Despite the structure, children find ways to assert agency. Small games emerge in the corners of the dormitory: a whispered counting game, an improvised toy made from scraps, or a quiet song to pass the time. These acts are fragile and must be conducted with care. Any loud noise or deviation risks punishment, but they are essential. They preserve identity, creativity, and a sense of autonomy in a world otherwise dominated by regulation and labor. The workhouse, even in its severity, cannot fully extinguish the human instinct to play, imagine, or connect. Social hierarchies among children are immediate and fluid. Older or stronger children often establish dominance, guiding routines or claiming the better sleeping spots. Friendships form cautiously, tempered by scarcity and competition. Sharing a piece of bread or assisting a peer carries both risk and reward. Cooperation can build trust, but mistakes in judgment may attract attention from the matron or provoke resentment from others. Navigating these microdynamics is as important as completing tasks or consuming rations. It is a lesson in social intelligence learned early, under pressure, and with high stakes. Health is a persistent concern. Children are fragile under these conditions, thin, cold, and exposed to illness that spreads rapidly in close quarters. Minor colds are amplified by inadequate nutrition. Small injuries may become serious without proper care. The infirmary offers minimal treatment, often rudimentary remedies such as herbal infusions, thin gruel, or rest. Watching the sick, you realize that vigilance is essential not only for your own survival, but for anticipating risks that may threaten others. Adaptation, observation, and caution become essential early lessons. Religious instruction is another pervasive element. Daily prayers, hymns, and moral lessons are integrated into the schedule. These rituals are both structured and repetitive, reinforcing discipline while providing a framework of social expectation. For some children, these exercises offer comfort, a familiar rhythm, a moral compass, or a sense of belonging. For others, they are a reminder of constraint, a constant reinforcement of authority, and a lesson in compliance. In either case, the impact is formative. Faith and ritual are intertwined with survival and the regulation of behavior. By the end of the first day, a pattern emerges. The dormitories, meals, work, inspections, and rituals operate as a continuous loop, a structure that is both oppressive and instructive. Every moment teaches lessons about authority, endurance, and adaptation. The children who endure learn quickly that survival depends on more than physical strength. Observation, discretion, and subtle negotiation of rules are equally vital. Every glance, gesture, and action is weighted with meaning, and mastery of these lessons distinguishes those who navigate the system successfully from those who struggle. Yet even amid the monotony and severity, small sparks of resilience and ingenuity persist. Children create private routines, share minor resources, or quietly support one another. These acts are fleeting but essential, offering brief reprieves from the relentless structure of the workhouse. They are evidence of the enduring human instinct to adapt, connect, and assert identity even under extreme constraint. As night falls and you lie on the narrow cot exhausted, the day's lessons settle in. Hunger, labor, supervision, and social dynamics have combined into a complex web of survival. You begin to understand that the workhouse is not merely a place of punishment or correction. It is a carefully structured environment designed to test endurance, teach obedience, and shape behavior from the earliest age. And yet, amid the strict rules and relentless observation, you cannot help but wonder, how will these early lessons in labor, compliance, and strategy shape the mind, spirit, and future of children growing up behind these walls? Weeks turn into months, and the novelty of the workhouse fades, replaced by the stark reality of structure, scarcity, and oversight. For children, survival is not measured solely by meals or labor. It is dictated by adaptability, vigilance, and the ability to navigate the intricate web of authority and peer relations. Every day is a lesson in observation, calculation, and discretion. Even the simplest tasks, sweeping floors, carrying water, or folding blankets, carry multiple layers of consequence. For physical survival, social standing, and avoidance of punishment. Children quickly internalize the routines. They learn to anticipate the matron's inspection, pace their work to minimize mistakes, and adjust behavior according to who is watching. A glance at the wrong time, a misaligned garment, or a whispered comment can lead to reprimand or additional labor. Over time, these experiences condition acute awareness of personal conduct, teaching children that vigilance is as necessary as endurance. The mind, as much as the body, becomes a tool of survival. Despite these pressures, children find subtle ways to assert agency. Games, stories, and small acts of rebellion emerge in corners of the dormitory or behind closed doors. A whispered rhyme or a tiny sketch on scraps of paper becomes a private assertion of identity. These activities, though small, are psychologically crucial. They provide relief from monotony, cultivate creativity, and preserve a sense of self in an environment where autonomy is severely restricted. Even minor acts of independence, hiding a bit of bread, choosing a preferred sleeping spot, or quietly assisting a friend, are exercises in agency. Social dynamics among children are equally complex. Friendships, alliances, and rivalries form under the constant supervision of authority. Cooperation is necessary for survival. Sharing rations, helping with chores, or watching for oversight can prevent punishment. Yet trust is fragile. Misjudged alliances or indiscretions can attract attention from both peers and supervisors. Children rapidly develop social intelligence. They read cues, anticipate reactions, and learn subtle negotiation, balancing self-preservation with collective support. The workhouse, in its rigidity, inadvertently fosters these interpersonal skills, even as it enforces compliance. Hunger remains a constant teacher. Children learn to ration food, eat strategically, and conserve scraps for later. The lessons of scarcity are both practical and psychological. Patience, delayed gratification, and careful observation of the environment become essential. Those who master these skills gain slight advantages, while those who miscalculate endure greater discomfort. Food is not merely sustenance, it is a measure of competence, adaptation, and ingenuity. The psychological impact of this environment is profound. Repetition, surveillance, and scarcity create a pervasive sense of vigilance. Children develop acute observational skills, heightened awareness of consequences, and careful self-regulation. Yet these adaptations come at a cost. Anxiety, hypervigilance, and emotional restraint become normalized. Even private moments are often measured, as the fear of punishment or disapproval lingers beyond the immediate presence of authority. Survival, it seems, is inseparable from constant mental engagement. Labor, too, reinforces these lessons. Tasks are repetitive, demanding, and strictly monitored. Mistakes invite correction, and efficiency is rewarded with minor privileges or reduced oversight. Over time, children learn the importance of precision, endurance, and timing. Work is never neutral. It is both instruction and evaluation, shaping not only skill but character. The relentless repetition also fosters ingenuity. Small improvements in technique, strategies for conserving energy, and discrete methods of collaboration emerge as survival mechanisms. Religious instruction and moral guidance provide additional structure. Hymns, prayers, and lessons reinforce compliance, patience, and obedience. For some children, these rituals offer comfort, rhythm, and predictability. For others, they reinforce the sense of constraint and supervision. In either case, the lessons extend beyond morality. They teach attention, punctuality, and response to authority, integrating psychological conditioning into the daily routine. Health remains precarious. Illness spreads rapidly, and nutrition is insufficient to fully support growth. Minor injuries or colds are amplified by fatigue and hunger. Observing illness in peers fosters both caution and empathy. Older children may assist younger ones, teaching responsibility, cooperation, and subtle forms of leadership. These experiences highlight the duality of the workhouse. While rigid and punishing, it also cultivates skills, bonds, and resilience that extend beyond immediate survival. By the end of several months, it becomes evident that children are adapting in multiple dimensions: physically, socially, and psychologically. They endure hunger, labor, and oversight, while simultaneously finding ways to assert identity, maintain relationships, and carve small spaces of autonomy. The workhouse teaches lessons of endurance, observation, and negotiation, but also leaves traces of tension, caution, and heightened self-awareness that may persist long after leaving its walls. Yet even amid adaptation, questions remain unresolved. You notice how children oscillate between compliance and quiet resistance, vigilance and fleeting spontaneity, endurance and exhaustion. Survival requires constant calculation, yet the instinct to play, imagine, and assert agency persists. This tension between imposed authority and human resilience defines the workhouse experience for the young. And so, as the dormitories fall silent and the children settle into their narrow cots, one question lingers. Will the lessons of endurance, vigilance, and subtle ingenuity strengthen their future beyond the workhouse? Or will the relentless demands of obedience and scarcity leave lasting psychological scars that shape their perception of freedom, trust, and personal agency for years to come? Months stretch into years, and the workhouse becomes not just a place of survival, but a crucible that shapes children in every conceivable way. By now, the routines are fully internalized. The timing of meals, the precision of chores, the subtle patterns of authority, and the rhythm of inspection. Survival has become instinctive, and adaptation has taken root in body, mind, and behavior. Hunger, labor, and oversight, once alien and overwhelming, are now familiar, and the children have developed strategies to navigate them with careful skill. The long-term physical consequences of this environment are undeniable. Children grow more slowly than those outside its walls. Their bodies are thin, endurance is tested constantly, and the risk of illness is ever present. Nutrition is minimal, and any deficiency can compound the effects of labor and environmental exposure. Yet within these limits, physical resilience emerges. Children learn to conserve energy, pace themselves through tasks, and adapt to scarcity in ways that strengthen endurance, even if overall health remains fragile. The body, like the mind, becomes a tool for measured survival. Psychologically, the impact is profound. The constant supervision, repetitive routines, and enforced obedience shape perception and cognitive patterns. Children develop acute observational skills, heightened awareness of consequences, and a careful management of social interactions. Vigilance becomes second nature, and the ability to anticipate authorities' presence or reactions is finely honed. These adaptations, while enhancing survival, also imprint long-term behavioral patterns. Hypervigilance, cautious trust, and meticulous self-regulation often extend beyond the workhouse into adult life. Socially, children form bonds that are cautious yet essential. Alliances, friendships, and mentorships arise under the pressures of scarcity and oversight. Older children guide younger ones, teaching strategies for rationing, navigating labor, and avoiding punishment. Acts of solidarity, sharing food, quietly assisting with chores, or protecting a vulnerable peer become subtle forms of resistance and cooperation. These interactions nurture empathy, leadership, and social intelligence, even in an environment designed to suppress individuality. Yet trust remains provisional, shaped by experience and observation. Cooperation carries risk, and misjudgments can result in both peer conflict and attention from authority. The interplay of endurance and subtle autonomy is central to the children's experience. Small acts of ingenuity, hiding a scrap of bread, inventing a game, or finding a moment of privacy, allow them to assert agency within rigid constraints. These moments, fleeting yet meaningful, provide psychological relief and maintain identity. They remind us that even in environments designed for control, human resilience and creativity persist. Adaptation is not synonymous with submission. It is a deliberate, strategic response to the demands of authority, scarcity, and labor. Religious instruction and moral oversight also leave a lasting imprint. The repetition of prayers, hymns, and moral lessons reinforces discipline, punctuality, and obedience, shaping not only behavior but thought patterns. For some children, faith and ritual provide comfort and structure. For others, they serve as reminders of constraint and surveillance. In either case, the experience teaches that guidance and oversight are intertwined, creating a framework that integrates moral, social, and practical lessons into the rhythm of daily life. When children finally leave the workhouse, whether through placement in apprenticeships, employment, or adulthood, they carry with them the complex legacy of their upbringing. They have learned resilience, observation, ingenuity, and social navigation, skills that equip them to survive in challenging circumstances. Yet they may also bear the subtle psychological weight of hypervigilance, caution, and deeply ingrained self-regulation. Their understanding of authority, scarcity, and cooperation has been profoundly shaped by this formative environment. Historically, the experiences of juvenile inmates illuminate broader social attitudes of Victorian society. The workhouse system was predicated on the belief that poverty required correction, that labor, discipline, and oversight could instill morality and industry. Children were not only recipients of charity, but subjects of social engineering. The combination of labor, rationing, and supervision reflects a societal approach to shaping behavior and managing risk among the poor. Yet within these constraints, human resilience persisted, revealing the limits of authority and the enduring capacity for adaptation. Even amid hardship, small acts of resistance and ingenuity offer powerful lessons. Children who played quietly, shared food, or assisted one another demonstrated that human agency is never fully extinguished, even under extreme constraint. These acts remind us that survival is not merely physical endurance, it is the ability to maintain identity, assert autonomy, and nurture relationships in a world designed to curtail both. The workhouse, while harsh and unyielding, inadvertently fostered skills and qualities that extended far beyond its walls. As you reflect on the cumulative effects of juvenile life in the workhouse, one question remains: to what extent do the lessons of endurance, vigilance, and subtle ingenuity prepare children for life beyond these walls? Do they equip them with resilience, social intelligence, and adaptability? Or do the relentless pressures of scarcity, obedience, and oversight leave lasting marks that shape trust, autonomy, and the perception of freedom for years to come? The answers, like the workhouse itself, are complex, enduring, and deeply human. Story 5: Workhouse Labor, Breaking Stone and Building Character. The day begins long before sunlight reaches the dormitories. You awaken to the harsh clanging of bells, the thin light of winter filtering through high, barred windows. Labor awaits, not as an opportunity, but as a structured necessity and obligation intertwined with survival, observation, and social hierarchy. Within minutes, you are dressed in coarse clothing, assigned to tasks dictated by age, ability, and the careful supervision of matrons or workhouse officials. There is little room for choice. Every action, every movement is governed by rules and expectation. Stone breaking is among the most notorious forms of labor. A pile of rocks waits outside, each jagged piece heavy and unwieldy. You lift, carry, and hammer with repetitive precision, the sound of clattering stone echoing across the yard. Work is measured, monitored, and timed. Any slowness, misstep, or distraction draws the watchful gaze of authority, often followed by a reprimand or additional duty. Over time, the labor itself becomes as much mental as physical. You calculate efficiency, how to lift without straining, pace movements to conserve energy, and anticipate moments when supervisors are less attentive. The body endures, but the mind is continually engaged in strategy. Other forms of labor: scrubbing floors, hauling water, preparing meals, sewing garments carry similar lessons. Repetition instills endurance, efficiency, and attention to detail, while the structure of supervision teaches compliance and self-regulation. Tasks are often tedious and exhausting, yet each is carefully monitored to reinforce hierarchy and instill the values of discipline and perseverance. Mistakes are not tolerated lightly. A poorly swept floor or a misaligned stitch can result in additional work or the subtle loss of privileges. In this way, labor serves dual purposes. It sustains the workhouse while shaping behavior and character. Children participate according to their abilities. Even the youngest are tasked with cleaning, carrying small loads, or assisting in kitchens. These chores, though simple, carry high stakes. Mistakes draw attention, while successful execution yields minor praise, approval, or a fleeting sense of accomplishment. Children learn quickly that labor is inseparable from survival. It is not merely the completion of physical tasks that matters, but the demonstration of reliability, attentiveness, and adaptability under scrutiny. The psychological impact of constant labor is profound. Monotony, fatigue, and repetition create a pervasive sense of tension, yet also provide structure. The mind becomes attuned to patterns, the timing of meals, the rhythm of oversight, the expectations of efficiency. Work, while exhausting, is instructive. Each repetition teaches endurance, problem-solving, and subtle forms of self-management. Those who master these lessons gain both practical skill and a degree of social advantage, earning trust or minor privileges within the rigid hierarchy of the workhouse. Social dynamics among laborers are equally shaped by the work itself. Tasks are often completed in teams, and cooperation becomes essential. Sharing labor efficiently, assisting peers, and anticipating the movements of others reduces errors and avoids punishment. Leadership emerges naturally. Older or more experienced workers guide novices, offering subtle instruction, encouragement, or warning. These interactions foster social intelligence, empathy, and practical problem-solving, even as the environment emphasizes compliance and hierarchy. Yet labor is also a site of tension and conflict. Competition for easier tasks, perceived slights, or unequal distribution of responsibility can lead to disputes. Authority responds swiftly, reinforcing hierarchy and discouraging rebellion, but the conflicts highlight the human drive for autonomy, fairness, and self-preservation even under constraint. Children and adults alike learn to navigate these tensions carefully, balancing assertiveness with deference, cooperation with discretion. Health is another critical concern. Repetitive manual labor strains bodies already weakened by malnutrition. Cold, damp conditions, poorly maintained equipment, and long hours exacerbate fatigue and susceptibility to illness. Minor injuries, blisters, scrapes, or muscle strain are common, yet often treated minimally. Labor teaches both endurance and caution. Careful attention to technique, packing, and environmental hazards becomes as essential as speed or strength. Survival requires both physical skill and mental calculation. Despite the demands, small acts of ingenuity persist. You observe ways to make tasks slightly easier, conserve energy, or cooperate with peers to reduce effort without attracting punitive attention. These strategies are subtle, almost imperceptible, but essential for long-term endurance. Innovation within constraint becomes a critical skill. How to complete labor efficiently, preserve strength, and maintain dignity under relentless oversight. As the day draws to a close, the cumulative effect of labor is apparent. Exhaustion weighs on both body and mind, yet the lessons of endurance, observation, and strategy have been reinforced repeatedly. You notice how survival depends not only on physical capability, but on vigilance, adaptability, and the ability to navigate social and hierarchical dynamics. Labor, in this sense, is as much an exercise in psychological resilience as in physical strength. And yet, despite the rigor, the monotony, and the fatigue, one question remains. How will this relentless cycle of labor, oversight, and adaptation shape the children and adults who endure it? Will the skills of endurance, observation, and subtle ingenuity prepare them for life beyond the workhouse? Or will the constant pressure leave lasting physical, psychological, and social scars? The answer, like the workhouse itself, lies hidden in the months and years of daily survival. Weeks into your labor, you begin to feel the full weight of routine, repetition, and observation. The tasks themselves, stone-breaking, scrubbing, hauling water, are physically demanding, but it is the relentless structure and oversight that shape the mind more profoundly than muscle or bone. Each day reinforces lessons not only about endurance, but about vigilance, self-regulation, and the careful negotiation of authority. The workhouse operates as both a physical and psychological environment, and survival depends equally on mental agility as it does on strength. The monotony of labor is deceptively instructive. Hours spent pounding stones or scrubbing floors teach focus and persistence. You learn to measure effort, pace your body, and anticipate the rhythm of the workday. Over time, movements become automatic, almost meditative, yet your mind is never entirely free. Attention must remain constant. To avoid mistakes, to conserve energy, to read the mood of overseers, and to navigate the social environment of peers. Labor is thus a training ground for mental endurance, a subtle education in patience, strategy, and resilience. Observation becomes an essential skill. Supervisors, matrons, and even more experienced peers are constantly monitoring behavior. Any deviation, slowness, distraction, or misalignment of effort can attract correction, punishment, or additional labor. You learn to read subtle cues. A glance, a gesture, or the tone of a word can signal scrutiny, approval, or impending reprimand. The ability to anticipate authorities' reactions becomes nearly as important as completing tasks efficiently. Children and adults alike internalize this vigilance, creating a mental map of risk and compliance that governs every action. Yet within this environment, ingenuity thrives quietly. Inmates develop small strategies to ease the physical and psychological burden of labor, timing breaks to avoid attention, collaborating discreetly with peers to share effort, conserving scraps of food, or finding brief moments of distraction without detection. These small acts are forms of agency, subtle exercises in autonomy that preserve selfhood amid constraint. Though they may appear trivial, they are critical for sustaining morale, endurance, and psychological balance. Social dynamics play a central role in coping with labor. Tasks performed in groups require cooperation, coordination, and attention to hierarchy. Older children and stronger adults naturally assume leadership, guiding others in technique and packing, offering subtle warnings, or intervening to prevent mistakes. Alliances are forged not only out of necessity, but also as mechanisms of survival. Trust is tentative yet valuable. Collaboration can reduce effort and protect against scrutiny, while misjudgment may invite conflict or punishment. In this way, the workhouse environment cultivates practical social intelligence under pressure. The psychological strain is tangible. Constant repetition and scrutiny foster stress, anxiety, and fatigue, even among the most resilient. Mistakes carry consequences, and the pressure to perform perfectly is relentless. Over time, the mind adapts. You become attuned to risk, disciplined in action, and cautious in thought. Yet these adaptations come with trade-offs. Hypervigilance, tension, and the suppression of spontaneity become ingrained. The workhouse teaches efficiency, compliance, and endurance, but at the cost of freedom, playfulness, and at times trust in others. Children in particular develop unique coping strategies. They create private games, share small tokens of comfort, and invent rituals to break the monotony of labor. Storytelling, whispered jokes, or subtle competitions provide mental relief, fostering creativity and a sense of control. These acts, though discreet and fleeting, are vital for maintaining a sense of identity and agency. They demonstrate that even in the harshest circumstances, human resilience finds expression in ingenuity, play, and subtle defiance. Labor also teaches observation and anticipation of social hierarchies. You notice which peers are more lenient, which supervisors enforce rules strictly, and which moments allow discretion. Inmates develop nuanced strategies for compliance and minor negotiation, conserving effort when supervision is lax, trading favors to ease burden, or quietly managing minor infractions. The combination of physical endurance and mental calculation becomes a defining feature of survival. Health, intertwined with labor, remains a constant concern. Repetition strains muscles and joints, cold and damp conditions exacerbate fatigue, and malnutrition magnifies vulnerability to illness. Observing peers, learning preventative techniques, and packing oneself are crucial. Even small innovations, adjusting posture, sharing water, or rationing energy become critical survival mechanisms. The workhouse environment transforms physical and mental adaptation into a daily exercise of ingenuity, strategy, and perseverance. By the end of months under this relentless routine, you begin to recognize the dual nature of labor in the workhouse. On one hand, it cultivates resilience, social intelligence, and strategic thinking. On the other, it imposes monotony, psychological strain, and a constant vigilance that leaves traces on behavior and perception. Labor teaches lessons that extend far beyond the workhouse. Endurance, foresight, adaptability, and observation are skills that will shape the rest of life. Yet these gains are inseparable from the burdens they exact. And still, one question remains. Will the lessons learned through endless, supervised labor strengthen individuals for challenges beyond the workhouse? Or will the unrelenting repetition, oversight, and scarcity leave lasting scars on their ability to trust, to innovate freely, and to act without constant calculation? The answer, like the workhouse itself, lies somewhere between endurance and constraint, ingenuity and suppression, survival and loss. Years pass, and the daily rhythm of the workhouse becomes almost second nature. Stone breaking, sweeping, hauling water, and kitchen labor have ceased to feel exceptional. They are part of the body's memory, etched into muscles, posture, and habits. Yet it is not just the body that has been shaped. Your mind, attention, and social instincts have been molded with equal intensity. The lessons of endurance, observation, and adaptation are embedded deeply, leaving traces that will endure far beyond the walls of the workhouse. Physically, the toll of labor is undeniable. Constant, repetitive tasks have strengthened muscles, honed coordination, and fostered stamina, but at the expense of full growth, flexibility, and often long-term health. Chronic fatigue, joint strain, and the lingering effects of malnutrition mark many who spend years under such conditions. Labor has taught resilience, yet it has also exacted a permanent price. Strength exists alongside fragility, endurance alongside vulnerability. Psychologically, labor has imposed both discipline and constraint. Repetition, monitoring, and scarcity cultivate mental resilience, attentiveness, and careful planning. You have learned to anticipate authority, read social cues, and navigate hierarchical structures with skill. Yet these same adaptations carry costs. Hypervigilance, heightened caution, and reliance on structured routines may linger long after leaving the workhouse, influencing perception, social interaction, and decision-making. The very skills that enabled survival within its walls may create challenges in less structured, more autonomous environments. Social intelligence emerges as both necessity and survival mechanism. Work requires cooperation, coordination, and negotiation. Older or more capable inmates mentor younger ones, teach strategies for endurance, and subtly influence outcomes. Friendships are forged cautiously, alliances are formed strategically, and subtle acts of solidarity, sharing food, conserving energy, covering for errors, create networks of support. These skills of collaboration, negotiation, and empathy are invaluable lessons, demonstrating the human capacity to adapt even under oppressive circumstances. At the same time, the workhouse teaches the limits of authority. Subtle acts of ingenuity, improvised tools, small diversions from monotony, or clever redistribution of labor persist despite oversight. Children and adults alike learn that obedience does not require complete surrender of agency. Within constraint, creativity survives, and resilience is demonstrated not only through endurance but through subtle resistance and the ability to maintain identity. These lessons, though small, reflect the enduring human instinct to assert control over one's circumstances. Historically, the labor of the workhouse illustrates Victorian attitudes toward poverty, morality, and social engineering. Poverty was perceived as a moral failing to be corrected through labor, regulation, and observation. Children and adults were subject to tasks designed to instill discipline, endurance, and industriousness. Labor was not merely functional. It was moral instruction, a means of shaping character while sustaining the institution. The physical and psychological imprint of this labor reflects broader societal beliefs about responsibility, conformity, and the value of structured effort. Yet the legacy of workhouse labor is paradoxical. It fostered resilience, strategy, social intelligence, and adaptability, equipping many for the hardships of adult life. At the same time, it imposed monotony, stress, and subtle psychological strain, shaping individuals in ways that were often enduring and not entirely voluntary. The lessons learned were inseparable from the costs exacted, creating a complex interplay between survival, adaptation, and long-term impact. Even amid hardship, moments of ingenuity, cooperation, and subtle defiance endure in memory. The small strategies to ease labor, the quiet games, the shared rations, and the careful negotiations all reveal that human agency persists under constraint. These acts, though minor in the context of the workhouse, highlight a timeless truth. Authority may shape behavior, but it cannot entirely extinguish creativity, empathy, or the drive to endure and adapt. Reflecting on this legacy, one final question emerges. Do the skills and resilience developed through years of strict labor and oversight equip individuals to thrive in freedom? Or do the lasting impacts of surveillance, monotony, and scarcity create enduring patterns of caution, restraint, and psychological tension? The answer is neither simple nor uniform. The workhouse leaves behind a population transformed by endurance, ingenuity, and adaptation, yet marked by the subtle weight of relentless authority, a dual legacy of survival and constraint that would echo across generations. Story 6. Silent desperation, mental strain in a harsh world. The day begins as always, with the clanging bell echoing through the cold, empty corridors. You rise from your narrow cot, muscles stiff from the scant padding beneath you, and prepare for another day of routine labor, rations, and observation. Yet beyond the physical demands, an invisible weight bears down on you, the constant, almost imperceptible pressure that permeates every moment. The expectation of compliance, the scrutiny of overseers, and the relentless monotony of survival. Mental strain is one of the most insidious forms of oppression in the workhouse. It is not loud, dramatic, or overtly violent. It seeps into the mind gradually, a persistent background hum of anxiety, vigilance, and calculation. Each day, you are expected to perform, obey, and endure with little respite or autonomy. Mistakes, however minor, carry consequences. The threat is not always explicit, but the consequences, extra labor, reduction of rations, or a sharp reprimand, are immediate and tangible. Over time, the mind internalizes this vigilance, making constant mental monitoring a necessity for survival. Monotony compounds this psychological weight. Tasks are repetitive and exhausting, sweeping floors, washing utensils, hauling water, breaking stones. Each motion is calculated, timed, and monitored, leaving little room for creativity or variation. The body grows accustomed to repetition, but the mind struggles against it. Thoughts wander, but distractions are dangerous. A misstep or lapse in attention can attract punishment. Monotony becomes both a physical and mental test, a slow erosion of spontaneity that teaches endurance through constraint. Hunger intensifies the strain. Meals are thin and insufficient, leaving the body in constant low-grade deprivation. Physical weakness translates into mental fatigue, dulling concentration and magnifying anxiety. Hunger also heightens irritability, tension, and social friction. Every ration is measured not only in calories but in strategic necessity. You must balance sustenance with observation, when to eat quickly, when to conserve, and how to navigate the limited provisions without drawing negative attention. The mind learns to calculate hunger, ration, and opportunity with meticulous care. Isolation, even among crowds, is another element of strain. Dormitories, workrooms, and dining halls are filled with people, yet genuine connection is difficult to establish. Trust is provisional, alliances are fragile, and any misjudgment may have consequences. The workhouse fosters a community, but one that is governed by hierarchy, scarcity, and surveillance. Human interaction becomes strategic. Friendships are measured, conversations are cautious, and support must be subtle. Emotional intimacy is risky, and the mind quickly learns to navigate social landscapes with precision. Sleep, while essential, is often uneasy. Narrow cots, cold stone floors, and the constant awareness of oversight leave the mind alert even during rest. Dreams are restless, occasionally punctuated by anxiety or the anticipation of the next day. Sleep itself becomes a negotiated space, necessary for survival, yet never fully restorative. Mental fatigue accumulates, creating a persistent tension that shapes thought, behavior, and perception. The workhouse does not merely demand physical endurance, it conditions the mind to anticipate, calculate, and regulate constantly. Children are particularly vulnerable. Their developing minds are exposed to the relentless stress of oversight, hunger, and social pressure. They learn early to read authority, anticipate consequences, and internalize rules. While some develop resilience, ingenuity, and strategic thinking, others show signs of persistent anxiety, hypervigilance, or emotional suppression. Even minor failures can leave lasting impressions, shaping personality, coping mechanisms, and perception of the world beyond the workhouse walls. Despite the oppressive conditions, coping mechanisms emerge. Quiet routines, small games, whispered stories, or shared jokes provide brief mental relief. Some find comfort in repetitive tasks, discovering a rhythm that offers predictability and a sense of control. Others develop subtle strategies to protect emotional reserves, conserving energy, observing carefully, or maintaining private rituals that reinforce identity. These strategies, though small, demonstrate the mind's resilience in the face of relentless strain. The workhouse teaches lessons in endurance not only through labor and hunger, but through constant mental engagement. Observation, calculation, and strategy become as vital as strength or skill. Even seemingly minor interactions carry layers of meaning. A glance, a tone of voice, or a small gesture can have consequences, forcing the mind into continuous evaluation. The mental landscape of the workhouse is complex, invisible, and unyielding, shaping perception as thoroughly as the work itself shapes the body. And yet, one question lingers, quietly pressing at the edges of awareness. How will the persistent mental strain of the workhouse, its monotony, scarcity, and scrutiny shape those who endure it? Will it forge minds capable of extraordinary resilience, strategic thinking, and adaptation? Or will it leave a subtle, enduring imprint of anxiety, caution, and constrained freedom that follows them long after the walls are left behind? The answer remains suspended, waiting to be revealed through years of endurance and survival. As weeks turn into months, you notice patterns forming not just in labor and meals, but in the ways children and adults respond to the constant mental pressure of the workhouse. Survival is no longer solely about completing tasks or consuming rations. It is also about navigating a landscape of observation, expectation, and subtle authority. Every action, glance, and word is measured, as the mind internalizes the lessons of compliance and vigilance. Yet within these constraints, strategies emerge: small acts of coping, resistance, and social negotiation that allow individuals to retain a sense of self. Children, particularly, display remarkable ingenuity. In dormitories, they invent whispered games or storytelling rituals to occupy idle moments and maintain mental engagement. These activities are fragile, conducted quietly to avoid punitive attention, yet they preserve a sense of agency and identity. Even minor acts, hiding a scrap of bread, sketching on scraps of paper, or creating small tokens of personal expression, become exercises in subtle defiance. In a world dominated by rules, these small actions are essential for psychological survival. Social dynamics evolve under pressure. Older or stronger children often assume leadership roles, guiding work, mediating disputes, and offering protection. Trust is cautiously extended, alliances are strategic, and cooperation is a survival tool. Sharing food, assisting peers with chores, or warning one another of oversight becomes a form of social currency. At the same time, competition for scarce resources, attention from overseers, minor privileges, or preferred tasks creates tension. Navigating these complexities requires observation, emotional intelligence, and strategic action, skills that are cultivated daily under pressure. Adults, too, develop coping mechanisms that blend compliance with subtle autonomy. Observing routines and patterns allows them to anticipate scrutiny and reduce risk. Some coordinate with peers to distribute labor more efficiently, conserve energy, or minimize punishment. Others quietly carve small spaces of comfort, a moment to rest, a private exchange of kindness, or minor personal indulgences without drawing notice. These strategies demonstrate resilience and ingenuity, highlighting how human agency persists even in rigidly controlled environments. Mental resilience is reinforced through repetition and routine. Though monotonous, the predictable structure of the workday allows inmates to anticipate events, plan their actions, and mentally prepare for challenges. Tasks, while physically taxing, offer rhythm and a measure of control over an otherwise constrained environment. This mental calibration is crucial. By mastering the patterns of oversight and routine, individuals reduce anxiety, conserve energy, and maintain focus on long-term endurance. Even within strict hierarchy and surveillance, subtle resistance persists. Inmates discover minor ways to bend rules without attracting punishment, rearranging chores slightly to conserve strength, quietly assisting a peer, or finding clever ways to eat or store rations. These acts are rarely overt but serve critical psychological purposes. They reinforce autonomy, foster self-efficacy, and preserve a sense of identity in a world designed to suppress both. The lessons learned through these strategies, patience, timing, negotiation, and discretion, extend far beyond the workhouse walls. Emotional coping is equally vital. The mental strain of hunger, fatigue, and monotony requires outlets. Some individuals focus on small pleasures, the warmth of a brief sunbeam in the yard, the texture of a favorite scrap of clothing, or the fleeting comfort of companionship. Others develop mental routines, internalizing tasks, prayers, or stories as a form of meditation. These practices are subtle but powerful, offering relief and preserving psychological equilibrium. Even when external circumstances cannot change, the mind can cultivate small domains of control and stability. Health and mental well-being are closely linked. Physical strain, poor nutrition, and illness exacerbate stress, while minor innovations, sharing food, adjusting posture, conserving energy, help maintain resilience. Observing and supporting peers also reinforces social bonds, creating a network of mutual protection that mitigates psychological strain. This combination of physical adaptation, social intelligence, and psychological coping reflects the human capacity for endurance under extreme constraint. By the end of months in the workhouse, a pattern emerges. Survival is no longer merely physical endurance or task completion. It is a sophisticated combination of compliance, observation, mental strategy, subtle resistance, and social negotiation. Inmates learn to read authority, anticipate consequences, and navigate scarcity with precision. They adapt not only to tasks and routines, but to the subtle pressures of hierarchy and scrutiny. This mental and social training, though born of necessity, fosters resilience, ingenuity, and enduring coping skills. Yet one question remains unresolved. Even as individuals develop resilience, strategy, and ingenuity under constant pressure, what are the lasting effects of this prolonged mental strain? Does the necessity of vigilance, calculation, and subtle negotiation leave enduring skills, or does it leave invisible marks? Anxiety, hypervigilance, and cautiousness that shape perception, trust, and behavior long after the workhouse is left behind? The answer lies in the long-term consequences of survival under relentless mental and social pressure. Years in the workhouse leave marks that are subtle yet profound, etched into memory, behavior, and perception. The daily routines of labor, hunger, and oversight have shaped not only bodies but minds. Mental strain, the constant vigilance, calculation, and anticipation of authority has become internalized. Even after leaving the institution, the habits of observation and self-regulation persist. You notice them in everyday choices, how you manage time, assess risk, or approach new relationships. The workhouse does not release its lessons lightly. It leaves an enduring imprint on thought, emotion, and social interaction. Children who endured this environment carry both resilience and caution into adulthood. They are attuned observers, capable of subtle strategy and careful negotiation. They can anticipate consequences, read social cues, and adapt to complex environments with skill. These abilities are survival mechanisms honed under pressure, demonstrating the human capacity to learn, innovate, and endure even in highly constrained circumstances. Yet these strengths coexist with vulnerability. Hypervigilance, anxiety, and emotional restraint remain ingrained, sometimes limiting spontaneity, trust, or the ability to relax in less structured settings. Social dynamics learned in the workhouse extend into adulthood as well. Alliances, mentorship, and cooperation developed for the sake of shared survival manifest as subtle social intelligence. You have learned how to navigate hierarchy, negotiate relationships, and balance self-interest with collective need. Even the smallest acts of kindness, collaboration, or shared ingenuity reflect lessons absorbed under duress. The workhouse, though oppressive, inadvertently cultivates skills that remain valuable long after physical confinement ends. Yet the cost of endurance is never entirely invisible. Emotional strain leaves traces, moments of hesitation, caution in forming trust, or anxiety when confronted with unpredictability. The mind has been conditioned to anticipate oversight and consequence at all times, creating patterns that persist beyond immediate survival. While these adaptations are functional in constrained environments, they can create challenges in freer, less predictable contexts. Psychological vigilance, once a tool of survival, may become a habitual lens through which the world is perceived. Despite these pressures, human resilience persists. Children and adults alike developed subtle forms of autonomy and ingenuity, whispered games, minor acts of resistance, careful conservation of resources, and strategic alliances. These acts demonstrate that even in an environment designed to suppress agency, human ingenuity endures. The lessons of vigilance and compliance coexist with creativity, empathy, and resourcefulness. Survival, it seems, is not merely the ability to endure labor or hunger, it is the capacity to maintain identity, nurture relationships, and assert autonomy within constraint. Historically, the mental strain of the workhouse offers a window into Victorian attitudes toward poverty and social control. Inmates were subject not only to physical hardship, but to psychological regulation. The system assumed that poverty required correction through labor, observation, and discipline. Mental strain was both a byproduct and an instrument of this approach, shaping thought, behavior, and emotional response. The experiences of children and adults alike illustrate the complex interplay between authority, survival, and the human mind under constraint. The workhouse demonstrates a paradoxical legacy. It cultivated resilience, strategy, social intelligence, and endurance, while simultaneously imposing anxiety, hypervigilance, and emotional caution. The lessons learned were inseparable from their costs, producing individuals capable of navigating difficult circumstances, but forever marked by the pressures endured. Survival was never simple. It required mental agility, subtle negotiation, and persistent adaptation. Even decades later, the faint echoes of mental strain can be traced in stories, diaries, and historical accounts. They reveal not only hardship, but also ingenuity, creativity, and the persistence of human spirit under extreme conditions. These lessons remind us that resilience is rarely effortless. It emerges from struggle, adaptation, and the subtle exercise of agency in environments that demand both compliance and ingenuity. And so, as you reflect on the enduring impact of mental strain in the workhouse, one final question emerges. Can the lessons of endurance, vigilance, and subtle resistance equip individuals to thrive beyond such oppressive environments? Or do the long-term effects of anxiety, hypervigilance, and constrained autonomy shadow the potential for full freedom and psychological recovery. The answer is complex. Like the lives, it shapes an enduring tension between resilience and constraint, ingenuity and caution, survival and its hidden cost. Story 7. The Infirmary, Illness and Death Among the Poor. The infirmary is a stark contrast to the rest of the workhouse. Where dormitories echo with the rhythm of labor and the hum of monotony, the infirmary is heavy with quiet suffering. Rows of narrow beds, each occupied by a pale, coughing, or feverish patient, line the cold, damp room. The air is thick with the mingled scents of disinfectants, unwashed bodies, and the unmistakable odor of disease. The infirmary is not a place of comfort. It is a controlled space of observation, care limited by resources, and the stark reality of mortality. Illness in the workhouse is relentless. Malnutrition, overcrowding, and exposure to cold and damp conditions create fertile ground for disease. Minor colds can escalate into pneumonia. Small injuries may become infected. Infectious diseases, typhus, tuberculosis, and influenza spread quickly, their impact magnified by close quarters and weak immune systems. Even routine ailments demand attention, yet the infirmary is understaffed and under-resourced, forcing triage and prioritization based not on need alone, but on available capacity. Survival often depends as much on timing, observation, and luck as on care itself. The infirmary staff are a mixture of medical practitioners, matrons, and assistants, each operating within strict limitations. Treatments are rudimentary by modern standards. Herbal remedies, weak tonics, poultices, and rest are the primary interventions. Feverish patients are monitored, yet comfort is minimal, and pain is often endured quietly. Observing the staff, you realize that their authority is as much about control as care. The sick are not only patients but inmates, their behavior, compliance, and interactions under scrutiny alongside their bodies. Authority extends even into illness. Children are particularly vulnerable in this environment. Their small bodies succumb quickly to infection, and their developing immune systems struggle under poor nutrition and stress. Fear is pervasive, not only of illness itself, but of the potential for isolation, neglect, or the inability to meet expectations upon recovery. Even among adults, the infirmary is a place of anxiety. Recovering patients worry about lost rations, the judgment of overseers, or the labor they will be expected to resume once deemed well. Illness is never entirely private. It is monitored, judged, and integrated into the social and hierarchical structure of the workhouse. Death, when it comes, is quiet but omnipresent. Mortality rates in the workhouse are high, particularly during winter or periods of epidemic. Corpses are removed with formality and efficiency, leaving behind grief, anxiety, and silent lessons for those who remain. Observing death daily, the living are taught the fragility of existence, the value of vigilance, and the stark reality that survival is never guaranteed. The infirmary becomes both a space of care and a continual reminder of the consequences of neglect, exposure, or misfortune. Mental strain in the infirmary is profound. Patients endure not only physical suffering but fear, uncertainty, and isolation. Observation is constant, yet comfort is scarce. Some cope through quiet routines, counting time, memorizing prayers, or maintaining focus on small tasks like folding bedding or arranging utensils. Others draw strength from shared suffering, forming tentative bonds with fellow patients. These strategies provide small relief, yet the psychological burden of illness in such an environment is relentless. Hygiene is a constant challenge. Overcrowding, limited water, and inadequate cleaning supplies create conditions where infection spreads unchecked. Patients are sometimes required to assist in cleaning themselves or others, reinforcing labor even in states of illness. This creates a paradox. Care is inseparable from endurance, and recovery is never entirely passive. Even in the infirmary, survival demands effort, observation, and adaptation. Despite the bleakness, acts of resilience emerge. Patients share limited resources, support one another through small gestures of kindness, and quietly assert agency in decisions about comfort or routine. These acts, though subtle, demonstrate that even under the most extreme conditions, human ingenuity and social cohesion persist. Survival is not merely biological, it is psychological, social, and strategic. By the end of your first day in the infirmary, the lessons of mortality, vulnerability, and endurance settle heavily. Illness is not only a matter of weakness, it is a test of resilience, observation, and social navigation. The sick learn quickly that compliance, awareness, and subtle strategies can influence survival, even when circumstances are grim. And yet one question remains. How does prolonged exposure to illness, death, and scarcity shape the body, mind, and social relationships of those who endure it? The answer, like the infirmary itself, is complex, sobering, and unresolved, waiting to be revealed in the coming weeks and months. Days in the infirmary settle into a rhythm, though one of quiet tension rather than routine efficiency. Time is measured not by clocks or labor schedules, but by bodily sensations, the ebb and flow of fever, the slow easing or intensifying of pain, the gradual recovery or decline of strength. Here, survival is as much a mental exercise as a physical one. You quickly realize that endurance relies on observation, patience, and subtle adaptation. Coping becomes an essential skill. Patients develop routines to manage both discomfort and anxiety. Counting time between visits, repeating prayers, or silently rehearsing chores to come provides mental structure and distraction. Even the simplest gestures, sitting upright for a few moments, adjusting a blanket, or sipping water slowly, carry significance. These tiny acts restore a sense of control in an environment dominated by illness and authority. Psychological survival, as much as physical recovery, becomes a daily task. Mutual support emerges as a vital component of endurance. Patients share scarce resources, extra water, small pieces of bread, or even a reassuring touch. Knowledge becomes a form of aid. One patient may know how to soothe a fever, manage chills, or clean a wound, offering guidance to those less experienced. These small networks of care foster cooperation, empathy, and social cohesion, demonstrating that resilience is rarely an individual effort in conditions of scarcity. Children are particularly observant. They learn to navigate both the physical and social environment of the infirmary. Younger patients mimic the behaviors of older ones, conserving energy, following routines, quietly observing staff, and cooperating in subtle ways to avoid negative attention. Even in illness, survival requires calculation, deciding when to ask for assistance, when to rest, and how to conserve strength without drawing scrutiny. These skills, forged in the harshest circumstances, demonstrate an extraordinary degree of psychological adaptation. Authority remains omnipresent. Staff monitor patients not only for physical signs of recovery, but also for behavior, compliance, and social interactions. Requests for assistance must be carefully timed and phrased. Defiance or impatience may provoke reprimand. Patients quickly internalize these dynamics, learning the subtle art of negotiation, how to assert needs without overstepping, how to communicate discomfort while avoiding punishment. The infirmary, like the rest of the workhouse, conditions mental and social acuity alongside physical survival. Despite hardship, small acts of agency persist. Patients create private routines, carefully arranging bedding, adjusting clothing, or subtly shifting positions to reduce pain. Children invent quiet games or whispered storytelling sessions to pass the time. These acts are fleeting, yet essential. They preserve identity, assert autonomy, and provide psychological relief. In an environment dominated by observation and constraint, these moments of self-expression are as vital as nourishment or rest. Illness also sharpens observational skills. Patients notice patterns in staff behavior, the timing of meals or visits, and the subtle signs of recovery or decline in others. This awareness allows them to anticipate opportunities, avoid reprimand, and strategically manage scarce resources. Observation is survival. Attention to detail, timing, and the moods of those in authority can determine whether one's recovery proceeds smoothly or is hindered by neglect or added labor. Mortality, omnipresent and quiet, leaves an enduring impression. Witnessing death, particularly of children or those close in age or circumstance, reinforces both the fragility of life and the value of vigilance. It teaches that survival depends on strategy as much as endurance, and that care, cooperation, and foresight can be as critical as strength or compliance. Death is not merely a tragic outcome, it is a constant, sobering lesson in the stakes of daily life. By the end of months in the infirmary, survival is revealed as a complex interplay of factors: physical resilience, careful observation, social intelligence, and psychological coping. Patients endure not simply by resting or following orders, but through strategy, ingenuity, and subtle assertion of agency. Endurance requires mind as well as body, observation as well as labor, and cooperation as well as compliance. And yet, one question lingers. Even as patients learn to navigate illness, scarcity, and oversight, how does prolonged exposure to suffering, mortality, and limited care shape the mind and spirit over the long term? Do these experiences cultivate resilience, empathy, and resourcefulness? Or do they leave indelible marks of caution, anxiety, and psychological strain that persist long after the infirmary walls are left behind? The answer is uncertain, lingering between survival and lasting consequence, waiting to be revealed in the final section. Years spent in the infirmary leave marks that are both visible and invisible, inscribed on the body, mind, and social awareness. Malnutrition, repeated illness, and constant exposure to disease weaken the body, sometimes permanently. Muscles fail to develop fully, growth is stunted, and immune systems remain fragile. Even after leaving the workhouse, these physical vulnerabilities linger, reminding survivors of the fragility imposed by circumstance. Survival is not merely a measure of strength, it is a combination of endurance, timing, and careful attention to risk. Psychologically, the infirmary imprints lessons of vigilance, calculation, and adaptation. Patients internalize routines, anticipate scrutiny, and develop strategies for care, comfort, and social interaction. Hypervigilance, caution, and careful observation become ingrained mental habits, serving as tools of survival in a world where even minor missteps can have consequences. These adaptations, while crucial for endurance within the workhouse, leave enduring patterns of thought, heightened awareness of risk, strategic calculation in social interactions, and a persistent sensitivity to scarcity and authority. Yet the infirmary also cultivates resilience and social intelligence. Patients form networks of mutual support, share scarce resources, and develop subtle strategies to assert agency despite illness or weakness. Children observe, imitate, and participate in these networks, learning cooperation, empathy, and strategic thinking at a young age. Acts as simple as sharing water, offering comfort, or assisting with a minor task become critical demonstrations of social intelligence and adaptability. These skills, forged in suffering, often extend beyond the workhouse into adult life, providing unexpected strengths in navigating complex social environments. Mortality remains a constant teacher. Witnessing death repeatedly teaches the fragility of life, the importance of preparation, and the subtle calculus of survival. The living learn to navigate illness strategically, protect themselves when possible, and seek support without overstepping boundaries. While the experience is emotionally taxing, it also fosters acute awareness, foresight, and a pragmatic understanding of the stakes inherent in daily existence. Resilience is inseparable from these lessons. Survival is as much mental and social as it is physical. The workhouse infirmary illustrates broader Victorian attitudes toward poverty, illness, and social control. Disease among the poor was seen as both a consequence of moral failing and an opportunity for correction through structure, observation, and limited care. The system emphasized efficiency and compliance over comfort, teaching harsh lessons in endurance, responsibility, and strategic adaptation. Yet within this rigid framework, human ingenuity, social cooperation, and empathy persisted, revealing the limits of authority and the enduring capacity for resilience. Even amid suffering, subtle acts of autonomy and agency persisted. Patients found ways to preserve dignity, maintain small comforts, and support one another. They discovered that survival is not merely passive endurance, but active engagement with environment, authority, and peers. These moments, sharing a blanket, whispering encouragement, or quietly adjusting one's surroundings, demonstrate that human agency survives even under extreme constraint. The infirmary, though grim, inadvertently taught lessons of cooperation, adaptability, and ingenuity alongside suffering. By the time patients left the infirmary, they carried with them a dual legacy: physical vulnerability tempered by resilience, psychological strain balanced by strategic thinking, and social acumen born of necessity. The lessons learned under the shadow of illness and mortality shape perception, behavior, and social interaction for decades, demonstrating the complex interplay between endurance and constraint, survival and its hidden costs. And so, one final question lingers. Does the exposure to constant illness, scarcity, and mortality equip survivors with extraordinary resilience, social intelligence, and foresight? Or do the cumulative burdens of suffering leave enduring psychological and physical scars that shape their perception of freedom, trust, and human connection for the rest of their lives? The answer, like the infirmary itself, is both sobering and revealing, a testament to the endurance, ingenuity, and fragility of the human spirit in the harshest of circumstances. Story 8: Discipline and Punishment, Maintaining Order in the Workhouse. Discipline in the workhouse is omnipresent, invisible yet palpable in every corner. The walls, corridors, and dormitories are not merely structures, they are instruments of observation, control, and authority. You quickly learn that survival is not only a matter of completing tasks, enduring labor, or navigating scarcity, but of understanding and anticipating the expectations of those in power. Every step, word, and glance is subject to evaluation, and even minor lapses invite scrutiny. Punishments are both formal and informal, ranging from verbal reprimands to physically demanding extra tasks. A child arriving late for morning roll call might be assigned additional chores. A spill in the kitchen could mean hours of scrubbing floors. Repetition is a common tool. Offenders are made to repeat work, reinforcing both the task and the lesson in compliance. These measures are designed not only to correct behavior but to instill obedience, endurance, and an internalized respect for authority. Mistakes are not only errors, they are opportunities to teach resilience through discomfort. Isolation is another form of discipline. A child who disobeys or questions orders may be confined to a small, cold room for a portion of the day, separated from peers and routine. The solitude amplifies awareness of transgression and heightens mental strain, teaching vigilance while emphasizing the social consequences of deviation. While not always physically painful, these measures are psychologically powerful, demonstrating how authority extends beyond immediate labor to shape perception, behavior, and emotion. Physical punishment, though less common than verbal or labor-based correction, is a persistent presence. Staff may use tools such as canes or straps, not arbitrarily, but in carefully controlled demonstrations of consequence. The purpose is not merely pain, but instruction. The body becomes a medium for learning, linking discomfort with behavior, and embedding the lesson in memory. Even witnessing punishment of others serves as a warning, reinforcing rules and hierarchy without the need for direct involvement. Children, in particular, internalize these lessons quickly. The combination of fear, observation, and repetition creates a psychological framework in which compliance becomes habitual. They learn to anticipate consequences, modify behavior preemptively, and navigate both authority and peers strategically. Minor acts of defiance are calculated, subtle, and often hidden, demonstrating that even under strict discipline, human agency finds a way to persist. Daily routines reinforce authority. Tasks, meal times, labor assignments, and rest periods are all structured to minimize autonomy. Inmates learn that deviation from prescribed behavior carries risk, and the mind adjusts accordingly. Observation, planning, and calculation become necessary survival tools. Knowing when to speak, when to act, and how to move ensures safety and reduces punishment. In this way, discipline operates as both control and instruction, shaping not only immediate behavior but long-term cognitive patterns. The social environment magnifies the effect of discipline. Peers observe one another, reinforce expectations, and sometimes participate in informal enforcement. Complaints or reports to staff are not uncommon, creating a culture in which oversight extends beyond authority figures to include social surveillance. Children quickly learn to navigate this network, balancing cooperation, discretion, and strategic social alliances. Discipline is therefore both top-down and lateral, creating a pervasive sense of vigilance. Even within this rigid framework, subtle forms of resistance emerge. Inmates find minor ways to bend rules without detection, completing tasks with minimal effort, quietly assisting peers, or creating small diversions to ease monotony. These acts are rarely overt but serve essential psychological functions, asserting autonomy and preserving a sense of self in an environment dominated by control. They demonstrate that compliance and resistance are not mutually exclusive. Both can coexist as strategies of survival. As the day progresses, the lessons of discipline and punishment settle into awareness. Compliance is essential, but survival also requires observation, ingenuity, and subtle negotiation. Authority is constant yet predictable, strict yet navigable. The mind and body learn to work in tandem, adjusting posture, timing, and behavior to avoid reprimand while preserving endurance. The workhouse teaches that order is maintained not only through overt control, but through the internalization of rules, vigilance, and strategic engagement with both authority and peers. And yet one question remains, pressing quietly at the edges of thought. How does prolonged exposure to strict discipline, constant scrutiny, and periodic punishment shape long-term perception of authority, autonomy, and social interaction? Does it cultivate resilience, respect, and strategic intelligence? Or does it leave subtle scars of anxiety, caution, and constrained freedom that endure long after the workhouse walls are left behind? The answer remains unresolved, waiting to be revealed through continued observation, endurance, and experience. Days in the workhouse operate like clockwork, yet each day carries the undercurrent of tension created by oversight and punishment. Survival requires more than compliance, it demands observation, calculation, and strategic social interaction. Inmates learn quickly that discipline is not simply external, it becomes internalized, shaping thought, behavior, and perception. The ability to anticipate authority, manage peers, and negotiate the environment quietly is as critical as physical endurance or task completion. Subtle resistance emerges as a necessary adaptation. Children and adults alike find minor ways to assert agency without attracting punitive attention. Tasks are completed with efficiency but minimal effort. Routines are slightly adjusted to conserve energy, and small acts of defiance like whispering stories, passing scraps of bread, or exchanging private signals provide psychological relief. These acts are fleeting and delicate, yet they preserve autonomy and identity within a system designed to suppress both. Even in obedience, survival is interwoven with strategy. Social hierarchies shape how discipline is experienced and navigated. Older or more capable children assume informal leadership, guiding peers, mediating conflicts, and subtly distributing labor to ease collective burden. Cooperation is essential. Small acts of assistance, shared observation of staff patterns, and mutual support mitigate both physical strain and punitive attention. Trust is carefully negotiated. Too much exposure risks betrayal, while too little connection limits support. Mastery of these dynamics is essential to surviving not only authority, but the social pressures of peers. Observation becomes a critical survival tool. Inmates learn to anticipate the moods and behaviors of staff, recognize patterns in punishment, and time requests or actions carefully. Understanding the rhythm of oversight allows for strategic compliance, when to follow rules strictly, when minor deviations are tolerated, and how to navigate conflicts without escalating scrutiny. The mind becomes finely tuned to the environment, learning not only the rules but the subtle social and psychological cues that govern consequence. Mental resilience is cultivated through repetition and adaptation. Daily routines, though monotonous, provide predictable structure, enabling the mind to plan, conserve energy, and manage stress. Inmates develop mental strategies for coping. Internalized counting, imagined routines, or private rituals offer comfort and control. Even in strict obedience, the mind seeks patterns, creates small spaces of autonomy, and exercises discretion. Survival, therefore, becomes as much a psychological endeavor as a physical one. Children often display ingenuity that surpasses adults in subtlety. Games, storytelling, or quiet rituals allow them to claim moments of agency, maintain identity, and resist monotony. These strategies are not mere distraction, they are essential for mental survival. They demonstrate that even in environments designed for uniformity and control, human creativity and adaptation find expression. Psychological endurance becomes as critical as physical stamina, reinforcing lessons of vigilance, strategy, and resilience. Acts of compliance themselves can become strategic. Following orders carefully may earn trust, reduce scrutiny, or allow small liberties elsewhere. In this way, obedience is not simply submission, but a tool for managing risk, maintaining morale, and carving out opportunities for subtle autonomy. Inmates quickly learn that authority is negotiable within bounds, and that strategic cooperation can coexist with private resistance. The duality of compliance and ingenuity defines daily life. Health and fatigue also influence discipline management. Physical weakness makes it harder to meet expectations, drawing attention and potential punishment. Observing one's own limits, packing labor, and managing energy are critical survival strategies. These adaptations reflect the interconnectedness of body, mind, and social intelligence. Endurance, observation, and strategic thinking operate in tandem to navigate both authority and circumstance. By the end of months under strict discipline, survival emerges as a complex interplay of obedience, strategy, and social skill. Compliance alone is insufficient. One must anticipate, observe, cooperate, and subtly assert autonomy to endure. Authority shapes behavior, yet the human mind and spirit find ways to adapt, resist, and negotiate freedom within constraint. In this way, discipline does more than control, it instructs, shapes, and tests the capacity for resilience and ingenuity. And yet one question remains, quietly persistent. How do these prolonged lessons in obedience, vigilance, and subtle resistance shape long-term character, social perception, and psychological resilience? Does the internalization of discipline produce individuals capable of exceptional endurance and strategic intelligence, or does it leave lasting traces of caution, anxiety, and constrained freedom? The answer, like authority itself, is complex and multifaceted, awaiting the perspective of years lived beyond the workhouse walls. Years of life under the constant shadow of discipline leave marks that are subtle yet enduring, shaping both mind and behavior. The lessons of vigilance, obedience, and strategic compliance persist long after the workhouse walls are left behind. Physical routines, mental observation, and social navigation become deeply ingrained habits. Survival in the workhouse was never solely about completing tasks or enduring hunger. It depended on mastering the art of negotiation, timing, and subtle assertion within strict limits. These patterns often carry forward into adult life, influencing behavior, perception, and interaction long after the immediate threat of punishment has passed. Psychologically, discipline produces a dual legacy. On one hand, it cultivates mental resilience, strategic thinking, and the ability to anticipate consequences. Inmates learn to observe authority carefully, read social cues, and navigate hierarchies with subtlety and foresight. These skills translate into long-term advantages in navigating structured environments, professional hierarchies, and social networks. The ability to assess risk, plan actions, and maintain calm under scrutiny is a product of years of careful observation and adaptation. On the other hand, prolonged exposure to punishment, scrutiny, and strict oversight leaves enduring psychological impressions. Anxiety, caution, and hypervigilance are common consequences. The mind becomes conditioned to anticipate correction, to measure every action, and to navigate social interactions with preemptive caution. Even in environments of relative freedom, these habits can persist, shaping perception, trust, and decision-making. The endurance gained through discipline comes with subtle costs, patterns of constrained behavior, and heightened alertness that are difficult to shed. Social intelligence, cultivated under constant observation, is another enduring outcome. Inmates learn to cooperate strategically, form alliances, and negotiate social hierarchies with care. Acts of subtle resistance, empathy, and shared support become part of survival strategy, teaching lessons in collaboration, compromise, and influence. Children often internalize these lessons early, learning both the benefits of social cohesion and the risks of miscalculation. These skills, though born of hardship, often equip individuals to navigate complex social networks later in life. Physical endurance is intertwined with psychological adaptation. Labor performed under scrutiny, combined with compliance and observation, strengthens not only the body but the capacity to withstand stress, monitor surroundings, and maintain consistent performance under pressure. The dual training of body and mind produces individuals capable of remarkable resilience, yet the cost of this preparation, fatigue, chronic strain, and vulnerability to stress remains quietly embedded. The workhouse also teaches a paradoxical lesson. Authority can shape behavior, but it cannot entirely suppress human ingenuity or agency. Even under strict discipline, inmates develop strategies for subtle autonomy, careful timing, whispered games, minor acts of resistance, or shared resource management. These small acts preserve dignity, maintain identity, and demonstrate that compliance and ingenuity can coexist. Survival is both obedience and adaptation, illustrating the complexity of human resilience in constrained environments. Historically, workhouse discipline reflects Victorian assumptions about poverty, morality, and social engineering. The system sought to correct perceived failings through strict rules, labor, and controlled punishment, teaching endurance and compliance as moral as well as practical lessons. Yet the lived experience of inmates reveals the limits of such control. While authority shapes behavior, observation, strategy, and subtle resistance persist, highlighting both the effectiveness and the human cost of these methods. Reflecting on this legacy, one final question remains. Does the endurance, strategic thinking, and social intelligence developed under strict discipline represent a form of empowerment born from constraint, or is it primarily a reflection of adaptation to oppression, leaving invisible scars of caution, anxiety, and constrained autonomy? The answer lies in the duality of human experience: resilience forged through adversity, agency expressed in subtle acts of defiance, and the enduring imprint of structure on both mind and behavior. The lessons of discipline are therefore complex, revealing both the strength and the vulnerability cultivated within the grim realities of the workhouse.